The year was 1850. The high desert of the Dinebikea. The Navajo land was already clenched in the fist of winter. The wind had no trees to stop it. Only mountains that looked like chipped flint and canyons that held shadows all day long. The sky was a pale, hard blue, and the silence was so big it felt like a presence. It was a stillness that lied. In this vast quiet, a man sat his horse on a high mesa, looking east. His name was Kiowa. He was a man made of the same things as the land around him, patient, hard, and watchful. He wore buckskins, worn smooth and dark with use, and his hair was bound in the traditional Navajo style. His face was stark, defined by angles that spoke of strength, but his eyes held the real story. They were dark, missing nothing, and they held a deep, settled ache, the kind that comes from loss that has nowhere to go. He was a warrior, a protector, his skills in tracking, in hunting, in the swift and brutal business of a fight, were known and respected among his people. He could read the prairie like a man in the East might read a book, noting the faintest disturbance in the grass, the way a hawk circled, the age of a track left in the dry wash. He was loyal to his clan, to the people, with a fierce, quiet intensity. But this loyalty was anchored by that ache. Years ago, before the Bilagana, the white men had become a constant shadow. Sickness had taken his wife and small son, and then, 2 winters passed, a patrol of soldiers, accusing his brother of stealing cattle, had not waited for an answer. They had left him lying in the snow. So Kiowa watched the land not just for deer, but for dust clouds, not just for weather, but for threats. The stillness of 1850 was a lie, a thin sheet of ice over a fast, cold river of conflict. The war was not declared. It was simply lived, a daily friction of 2 worlds rubbing against each other until they bled. Kiowa shifted on his horse, the leather of his saddle creaking in the cold. He had seen the smoke from the settlement below, his own settlement, rising thin and straight, a good sign. But his gaze was fixed farther east, on the smudge of smoke that meant the white man's fort. It was a scar on the land, a place of sharp corners and straight lines that did not belong. He felt the old anger tighten his chest, a cold mirror of the air he breathed. He turned his horse west, toward the canyons. Needing to check the traps he had set, he moved like a shadow, becoming part of the landscape. A man who belonged completely to the earth he rode on, yet was haunted by the ghosts it held. Many miles east, in a world that might as well have been the moon, Emma stood in a small, cold room, her hands plunged into a basin of icy water. She was washing altar cloths for the mission chapel. She, too, was an orphan. But her loss was a void, not an ache. She had no memory of a mother or father. Her entire life had been defined by the mission, a small stone and adobe compound attached to the growing cavalry fort. She had been raised by Sister Agnes, a woman whose faith was as hard and unyielding as the wooden benches in the chapel. Emma's life was a circle of quiet, repetitive tasks, mending uniforms for the soldiers, scrubbing floors, tending the meager garden in the summer, and always, the prayers. Her world was gray and brown, the color of her wool dress, the color of the dirt courtyard, the color of the high adobe walls that kept the world out, or, as she had begun to feel, kept her in. She was not unhappy, not exactly. Sister Agnes was not unkind, merely remote, focused on sin and salvation, things Emma could not seem to feel. But she was trapped. She felt a deep, suffocating passivity, as if she were a piece of furniture in a room, waiting to be moved. She would watch the soldiers ride out, full of noise and purpose, and feel a confusing mix of fear and envy. She would look past the walls at the same vast, empty prairie Kiowa watched, and it terrified her. But it also called to her. It was elsewhere, anything but here. She scrubbed the linen, her knuckles raw and red. She was 19 years old, pale and quiet. With deep brown hair she kept severely braided. She knew what was expected. Soon, perhaps, one of the officers, or a rancher from the new settlements, would see her, decide she was suitable, and ask Sister Agnes for her hand. She would trade the walls of the mission for the walls of a small house. The circle would just become smaller. She closed her eyes, a silent prayer forming. But it was not for salvation, it was for escape. The day broke apart 2 hours later. Emma had been sent just outside the main gate to the small creek to fetch fresh water. The soldiers at the fort were changing guard, a bugle cutting the thin air. It was a normal day. And then it was not. The sound was not a gunshot, but a volley, a scattered, panicked crackle of rifles from the north, where the creek bent around a bluff. Shouting followed, in English and in a language she did not know. Sister Agnes screamed her name from the mission gate. "Emma, inside now!" Emma dropped the buckets and ran, but she was too late. A small group of soldiers, perhaps 4 of them, burst around the bluff on horseback. They were not the usual patrol. They were riding hard, desperation in their faces. Behind them, maybe 6 or 7 Navajo warriors were pressing the attack, fanned out, firing arrows and the occasional rifle shot. It was a running fight, a blur of dust and chaos. One of the soldiers, a big man with a dark beard and panicked eyes, saw her. His horse was faltering, an arrow lodged deep in its flank. He looked at Emma, and his panic shifted to something else, a cruel, desperate calculation. He veered his horse toward her, breaking from the fight. "Grab her!" he yelled to another man. "What for?" "Hostage, you fool!" He leaned down from the saddle, his arm outstretched. Emma screamed and tried to scramble back, but he caught the fabric of her dress. He hauled her off her feet, his grip like iron, and threw her across the front of his saddle. The impact knocked the breath from her. "Got her!" he roared, pulling his horse back toward the fight, trying to get behind his comrades. "Hold your fire, you heathens, or the girl gets it!" Sister Agnes was on her knees at the gate, a cross clutched in her hand, her face white with terror. Kiowa was leading the attack. It had been a simple plan: cut off the soldiers who had ridden too far, drive them back, and take their horses. But it had gone wrong. The soldiers were fighting harder than usual, and now this. He saw the soldier grab the white woman. He saw the terror on her face, her body limp across the horse. He saw the man draw his pistol and press it to her head. Something cold and sharp moved in Kiowa's chest. It was not pity, it was rage. It was the old, familiar hatred of the Bilagana, who used everything, even their own women, as weapons, as shields. He saw the soldier's face, triumphant and ugly. He saw the woman, and she was not a white woman. She was a human being, trapped, helpless. It was a violation of something deep and fundamental. It was wrong. The fight paused, a terrible tableau. The soldiers huddled. Using the man with Emma as their center, the Navajo fighters pulled up, unsure, their arrows still nocked. Kiowa did not hesitate. His decision was not a thought. It was an instinct. He let out a sharp cry, a command to his men to hold. Then he kicked his horse, not at the main group but to the side, circling, drawing attention. The bearded soldier pointed his pistol at Kiowa. "That's right. Back off. We're leaving. You try to stop us. She dies first." Kiowa kept circling, his movements fluid, calm. He held his rifle in one hand, resting across his lap. He was watching the soldier, but also the man's horse. It was bleeding badly, trembling, its eyes wide. It was going to go down. "I said back off!" the soldier screamed. He was terrified. Kiowa suddenly raised his rifle. He did not aim at the soldier. He aimed at the horse. He fired. The sound was flat in the cold air. The soldier's horse screamed, a terrible sound, and collapsed, its front legs buckling. The soldier was thrown, losing his grip on both Emma and his pistol. He hit the hard-packed earth with a grunt. Emma rolled free, landing hard, the air stolen from her lungs again. She lay stunned, staring at the impossible blue sky. The soldier scrambled, reaching for his pistol in the dirt. Kiowa's horse was already upon him. Kiowa did not slow. He leaned from the saddle, his knife already in his hand. The movement was a single, fluid arc of violence. It was over before the soldier could raise his head. The other 3 soldiers stared, frozen for a heartbeat. That was all Kiowa's men needed. The air filled with arrows. Another soldier fell. The last 2 broke and ran, spurring their horses in a blind panic back toward the fort, forgetting the woman, forgetting everything but escape. The silence that fell was worse than the noise. It was heavy, filled with dust and the smell of gunpowder and blood. Emma pushed herself up onto her elbows. Her body ached. She looked at the bearded soldier. He was still... She looked up at the man who had saved her. Kiowa sat on his horse, looking down at her. His face was impassive, stone-like. His chest was rising and falling from the exertion. He, too, was breathing hard. He looked at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of a rescuer. They were the eyes of a man assessing a problem, or a prize. One of his men rode up, speaking in the rapid, guttural flow of the Navajo language. He gestured toward the fort, then at Emma. Kiowa listened, his gaze never leaving her. He nodded once. He dismounted, his movements economical. He walked toward her. Emma scrambled backward, crab-walking in the dirt, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break. This was not rescue. This was just a change of captors. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I have to go back. Let me go." Kiowa stopped, just out of her reach. He did not seem to understand her words, or he did not care. He looked at her gray dress, her pale face, her terror. Then he looked at the fort, where the alarm bell was now ringing frantically. He made his decision. He reached down. Emma flinched, covering her face, but he did not strike her. He grabbed her arm, his grip just as hard as the soldier's had been, but different. It was not cruel, it was impersonal, it was final. He pulled her to her feet. She stumbled, her legs weak. He half-dragged, half-lifted her and threw her onto his own horse, settling her behind the saddle. He swung up in front of her. "No," she wept, clutching at his buckskin shirt, her voice thin. "Please, God, no." Kiowa ignored her. He said something sharp to his men. They began to move, grabbing the soldiers' rifles and horses. Kiowa turned his horse, not east toward the fort, but west, toward the canyons, toward the high, cold mountains. He spurred the horse into a fast trot, and Emma had no choice but to cling to the waist of the man who had just saved her life, the man who was now stealing it. He took her away from the only world she had ever known, into the vast, terrifying silence of the land. He took her to the camp of his people, where she would be held. The ride was a blur of terror and confusion for Emma. She was bounced and jolted against Kiowa's hard back, her hands locked around his waist in a grip of sheer survival. The world she knew, the mission walls, the small creek, the predictable toll of the bell vanished behind the first canyon wall. The land that swallowed them was immense and terrifying, a maze of red rock and thorny scrub. The wind tore at her hair, pulling it free from its braid, whipping it across her face until it stung like small lashes. She wept, but the wind stole the sound. Kiowa himself was a silent, unyielding presence in front of her. He rode with a fluid ease, his body moving with the horse, as if he were part of it. He did not speak, not to her, not to his men who rode with them, their faces grim and streaked with the dust of the fight. After what felt like hours, a lifetime, they descended into a wide, sheltered canyon. Smoke rose from several hogans, the traditional dome-shaped Navajo dwellings made of earth and wood. The settlement was hidden, protected by the high canyon walls. As they rode in, people emerged from the dwellings, their faces turning toward the returning warriors. Women stopped their work, their dark eyes wide and curious. Children, who had been running and shouting, fell silent, clustering behind their mothers' skirts. Old men, their faces mapped with wrinkles, watched with a heavy stillness. The entire camp's attention focused on one thing: the white woman, disheveled and weeping, riding with Kiowa. He finally brought his horse to a halt in the center of the camp. He dismounted in one smooth motion. For a moment, he left her on the horse, a spectacle. Emma felt 100 eyes on her, stripping her bare. She was an alien creature, a thing of the enemy, delivered into their midst. Fear, cold and sharp, paralyzed her. Kiowa turned and, without a word, reached up for her. He did not offer a hand. He simply grasped her by the waist and lifted her down. Her legs buckled when she touched the ground, and she would have fallen if he had not held her arm. He steadied her, his grip firm, and then released her, pushing her slightly forward toward one of the hogans. An older woman emerged, her face severe. She wore a deep red blanket around her shoulders, and her silver hair was bound neatly. She looked at Kiowa, then at Emma, and spoke. Her voice was sharp, questioning. Kiowa replied, his voice low and even. He spoke for some time, gesturing back the way they had come. Then at Emma. The woman listened, her expression unchanging. Other warriors who had ridden with him added their own words, their voices more excited, more agitated. Emma could not understand a single word, but she understood the tone. She was being discussed. She was a problem. She was a prize. The man who had been in charge of the attack, the one who had brought her here, seemed to be arguing with the others. The older woman, clearly a figure of authority, finally silenced the others with a sharp command. She looked at Kiowa again, her gaze hard. He met it, his own face a mask of stone. He said something short, definitive. The woman's eyes narrowed. She turned and looked at Emma, a long, appraising stare that held no warmth, only a cold calculation. Then she nodded curtly and pointed to a small, isolated hogan near the canyon wall. She spoke to two young women, who approached Emma cautiously, as if she were a wild animal that might bite. They took her arms and guided her toward the small dwelling. Emma looked back, her eyes searching desperately for Kiowa. He was the only thing in this terrifying world she had a connection to. Even if it was a connection of violence and abduction, he was still standing by his horse, watching her. His face gave nothing away. He turned his back on her and began speaking to the other men, his attention now on the horses they had captured. Emma was led inside the hogan. It was dark and smoky, the air thick with the smell of juniper and mutton. A small fire smoldered in the center. The women released her and backed out, pulling a heavy blanket over the doorway, plunging her into near darkness. She was alone. She sank to the dirt floor, finally letting go of the control she had been clinging to. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, her small body shaking with terror, cold, and a profound, bottomless despair. Outside, the debate Kiowa had started was far from over. The camp's headman, a man named Tall Salt, had come from his hogan. He was older than Kiowa, his authority resting on wisdom and consensus. "You have done well to take the horses," Tall Salt said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at the captured rifles, then at the still-living soldier's horse that had been led back. "And the Bilagana weapons are a good prize, but the woman, she was a shield," Kiowa said, stripping the saddle from his horse. His movements were angry, precise. "The soldier took her. I could not let him use her." "You could have let him go." One of the other warriors, Hastian, countered. He was a younger man, his eyes still bright with the fight. "We would have lost the horses, but the fort would not be stirring like a kicked anthill. By taking her, you have brought their anger straight to our door." "They were already at our door," Kiowa said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They were on our land. They forget their boundaries every day." "She is a Bilagana," Tall Salt said, bringing the matter to its point. "The soldiers will come for her. They will come in great numbers." "Let them come," Hastian said, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. No, Tall Salt said, raising a hand. We are not ready for a war, not for one woman. He looked at Kiowa. But she is here, and she is a tool. The fort commander will want her back. She is worth more than horses. She is worth rifles, ammunition, blankets for the winter. Kiowa's head snapped up. She is not a piece of meat to be traded. Tall Salt raised an eyebrow. She is Bilagana. Since when do you care for them? Kiowa, have you forgotten your brother? Have you forgotten the families they pushed from Canyon to Chelly? She is one of them. She is a woman, Kiowa said, his voice tight. She was not fighting. She was pulling water from a creek. The soldier took her. It was a coward's act. And you performed a warrior's act by killing him. Tall Salt agreed. But what is done. She is our captive. We will use her. We will send a message to the fort. They will trade for her. Kiowa felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He looked at the hogan where they had put her. He could hear the faint sound of her crying. It was a sound he had not heard since his wife had died. The sound of absolute, helpless grief. It was not pity he felt. He told himself it was not pity. It was disgust. They were talking about her as if she were a horse, a rifle. He had killed the soldier for doing the same thing. And now his own headman was proposing it. She has no value, Kiowa said, grasping for an argument. She is a servant at the mission, a nothing. They will not trade for her. They are white, Tall Salt said simply. They value their own, even the weak ones. They will trade. It is a chance we must take. We need the supplies. The winter will be hard. Kiowa's jaw clenched. He was trapped. To argue further would be to defy his headman, to question the needs of the people. His loyalty, the very bedrock of his life, was now in direct conflict with this strange, unwelcome feeling in his chest. He felt a fierce, protective instinct for the woman he had just captured. It made no sense. She was the enemy. Her people had destroyed his family, his life. She was the pale, frightened face of everything he hated. And yet, he had seen her eyes when the soldier held the gun to her head. It was not the eyes of an enemy. It was the eyes of a rabbit in a snare. And he, Kiowa, had been the one to open the snare, only to put her in a cage of his own. He hated the feeling. He hated the weakness of it. He had brought this trouble. He had acted on instinct, a hot-blooded rage, and now the consequences were cold and complex. I will not be the one to guard her, he said abruptly. You will, Tall Salt replied, his voice firm. You captured her. She is your responsibility until the trade is made. It is your right, and your burden. Kiowa stared at his headman. It was an order, disguised as tradition. He was being bound to her. He gave a short, angry nod. He would not argue again. He would not show this weakness to his people. He would do his duty. But the conflict within him had just begun. He felt torn, his loyalty to his people pulling one way, and this new, strange, and unwanted compassion pulling the other. He looked at the setting sun. The red light painted the canyon walls, making the world beautiful and harsh. He felt a sudden, sharp loneliness. He was a man caught between the ghosts of his past and a present he did not understand. He saw her not as an enemy, not yet as a bridge, but as a mirror. She was as lost and trapped in this canyon as he was in his own grief. The thought brought him no comfort, only a deeper disquiet. For 2 days, Emma did not see him. The older woman, whose name she learned was Sani, brought her food a small bowl of corn mush and sometimes a piece of tough, roasted meat. She brought her water in an earthen jug. She did not speak English, and her expression was one of severe disapproval. Emma was kept in the hogan. A guard, one of the younger warriors, was posted outside the blanketed door at all times. She was a prisoner. The realization settled on her. A physical weight. The first night, she had not slept. Jumping at every sound, the barking of the camp dogs, the low murmur of voices, the cry of a night bird. The second day, she tried to speak to Sani. Please, Emma said, her voice hoarse from disuse and crying. Water, please, I must wash. Sani just stared at her, took the empty food bowl, and left. Emma felt a creeping dehumanization. She was dirty from the fight, her dress torn and stained with dirt and the soldier's blood. Her hair was a tangled mat. She felt like an animal. This was worse than the mission. The mission had been confinement. This was captivity. She tried to understand them. She would peek through a small gap in the Hogan's doorway. She saw a life that was both harsh and orderly. The women were in constant motion grinding corn, weaving blankets on large, outdoor looms, tending to children, cooking over open fires. The men mended harnesses, sharpened tools, or rode out in small groups, returning with deer or rabbits. They were a community, complete and self-contained. She was the only thing that did not belong. Her fear began to curdle into a strange, defiant anger. She was not a sack of flour. She was a person. On the third morning, Kiowa appeared. The blanket was pulled aside, and he filled the doorway, blocking the morning light. He had to duck to enter. He stood inside the small space, and the Hogan seemed to shrink, filled with his presence. Emma scrambled to the farthest wall, pulling her knees to her chest. He did not look at her. He carried a wooden bucket of water and a rough woven cloth. He set them on the floor. He also had a bundle wrapped in hide. He opened it. Inside was a Navajo skirt, woven in bands of red and black, and a simple, loose-fitting velvet blouse. He pushed them toward her with his foot. He spoke, and for the first time, she heard his voice directed at her. It was low and rough, like stones grinding together. He did not speak English. He gestured to the clothes, then to her own filthy dress. The meaning was clear. "I will not," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "I will not wear those." Kiowa looked at her. His gaze was cold, impatient. He did not understand her words, but he understood her defiance. "I am not one of you," she said, her fear making her bold. "I am a white woman. I am a Christian." Kiowa's expression flickered. He recognized no words, but he knew the tone of righteousness. He had heard it from the soldiers, from the agents. It was the sound of the white world, a sound that always came before they tried to take something. He pointed to her dress. "Didi," he said, his voice sharp. He tapped the clean clothes. "Didi. This, that." "No," Emma whispered. He took a step toward her. Emma flinched. He stopped, his frustration visible. He was a warrior, a hunter. He dealt in direct action, in silence, in the clean lines of violence. This woman's stubbornness was a language he did not speak. He was used to being obeyed, or at least understood. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a prize, not as a burden. He saw her matted hair, the dirt streaking her pale face, the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes. He saw the way she trembled, but also the way her chin was set, the small, desperate fire in her eyes. She was terrified, but she was not broken. This small, pale woman was defying him. He who had killed a soldier to get her. He who was now arguing with his own headman to protect her. A strange, unfamiliar feeling pricked at him. It was almost admiration. It was quickly followed by intense irritation. He turned and spoke sharply through the doorway. Sani entered, her face set in its usual disapproving lines. Kiowa spoke to her, gesturing at Emma in the clothes. Sani clicked her tongue in annoyance. She walked over to Emma and, without ceremony, grabbed the collar of her gray mission dress. Emma cried out and tried to pull away. "No, stop." Sani was wiry and strong. She began to pull the dress, intending to rip it from her. Emma fought, slapping at the older woman's hands. "Stop!" Kiowa's voice was not loud, but it cut through the small space like a knife. Sani froze, her hand still on Emma's dress. She looked at Kiowa, shocked. Kiowa felt a flush of anger. At Sani for her roughness. At Emma for her stubbornness. At himself for being here. He was the guardian. This was his responsibility. He walked to Sani and gently but firmly removed her hand from Emma's dress. He said something to the older woman, his voice low and firm. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a new, unwelcome understanding. She looked at Emma, then back at Kiowa. She snorted in disgust and stalked out of the hogan. Now he was alone with her again. The air was thick with the aftermath of the struggle. Emma was breathing in ragged gasps, her eyes wide and wet. Kiowa sighed, a rough sound of exasperation. He backed away. Giving her space, he sat on his heels near the door, a position of rest that was still coiled, ready. He pointed at the water, then he pointed at his own face, making a washing motion, then he pointed at her. Emma stared at him. He wanted her to wash. He pointed at the clean clothes, then at her torn dress. His meaning was unmistakable. Change. He made one more gesture. He pointed at her, then at himself, then at the door, and he waited. She understood. He would not let Sani force her. He would not force her, but he would wait here until she did it herself. The conflict was a stalemate. She was his prisoner, but in this small, dark space, she had a flicker of power, the power to refuse. And he, her captor, was giving her the dignity of a choice, even if the outcome was inevitable. Slowly, her breathing quieted. She looked at the bucket of water. It was the first act of kindness. However rough, she had received. She looked at the clean clothes. They were a deep, rich color, not the gray of her past. She looked at Kiowa. He was watching the fire, his profile harsh in the dim light. He was a savage, a heathen, a man who had killed another man right in front of her. And he was the man who had stopped Sani from ripping the dress from her back. Her world was turning upside down. The lines she had always known between white and native, between good and evil, between civilized and savage, were blurring. The soldier had been white and civilized, and he had been cruel. This man was a savage, and he had just shown her a strange, gruff respect. She did not know what to do. She only knew she could not stay in her own filth. Slowly, her movements stiff. She reached for the cloth. She dipped it in the water. The water was cold, but it felt good. Keeping her back to him, as much as the small space wouldn't allow, she began to wash her face and hands. Kiowa did not move. He did not look. He kept his gaze on the fire. He had given her a small space of privacy, and he would honor it. When she was done, she looked at the clothes. She picked up the velvet blouse. It was soft. She looked at him one last time. He was still. Keeping her back to him, she quickly, awkwardly, pulled off her ruined dress and pulled the new clothes on. They were large, but they were warm and clean. When she was finished, she sat, feeling strange, as if she were in a costume. Only then did Kiowa stand. He gathered her old, filthy dress. He looked at her. She met his gaze. Her eyes were still fearful, but the defiance was still there, now mixed with a profound, weary confusion. He nodded, a single, sharp acknowledgement. He had won the small battle, but he sensed she had not truly surrendered. He turned and left the hogan, taking her old life with him in a small, dirty bundle. Emma was left alone again, but something had changed. The solid ground of her world had cracked. She was still a prisoner, but the man who held her key was not the monster she had thought. He was something else, something far more complicated, and that, she found, was even more frightening. The hogan was a cage, but it was a cage that smelled of life, of wood smoke and roasting meat, a stark contrast to the sterile beeswax and cold stone smell of the mission. For the first few days, Emma lived in a fog of fear, punctuated by the rhythmic, alien sounds of the camp. She was left alone, a ghost in the new red and black clothes, but she was never truly alone. The guard at the door was a constant shadow, a reminder of her captivity. Sani, the old woman, brought her food twice a day. Her visits were silent, her disapproval a palpable force. She would place the bowl on the dirt floor and back away as if Emma carried a disease. Emma ate, huddled by the wall, forcing down the unfamiliar food, a thick stew with a strong, gamey flavor, and a heavy, fried bread. It was food meant to fuel hard work, and it lay heavy in her stomach, accustomed as she was to thin gruel and day-old bread. On the fourth day, Sani did not come. The blanket over the door was pulled back, and Kiowa entered. Emma, who had been tracing patterns in the dust, scrambled back against the wall, her heart leaping into her throat. He had not come into the hogan since the day he had given her the clothes. He was her guardian. Tall Salt had decreed it, but he had performed the duty from a distance, posting other warriors at her door. His presence now, inside the small, enclosed space, was overwhelming. He seemed to take up all the air. He carried 2 bowls. He shoved one toward her, less gently than he had pushed the clothes. He sat on his heels near the door, his own bowl in his hand, and began to eat. Emma stared at the bowl. It was the same stew. She didn't move. Kiowa ate, ignoring her. He ate with a clean, unhurried efficiency, his focus on the food. When he was finished, he looked at her. Her bowl was untouched. His eyes narrowed. A low, impatient sound rumbled in his chest. He pointed at the bowl, then at her mouth. "Eat." She shook her head, shrinking back. "I am not hungry." The words were a whisper, meaningless sounds he could not understand. He saw only the refusal. He saw weakness, the stubbornness of a spoiled child. He stood, and for a terrifying second, she thought he would strike her. Instead, he grabbed the bowl from the floor and stalked out, leaving her in the dim light, her stomach aching with a hunger she had been too proud, or too frightened, to acknowledge. He returned that evening, the same ritual. He entered, ducking his head. He placed a bowl before her. He sat and ate his own. This time, Emma was lightheaded from lack of food. The smell of the stew, which she had found repulsive, was now dizzying. She watched him. He ate, his gaze directed at the small, central fire pit. He was not looking at her. His stillness was unnerving. He was not like the soldiers at the fort, who were always loud, always laughing or shouting, their movements sharp and clumsy. Kiowa moved with a coiled economy, nothing wasted. His hands, she noticed, were scarred, but his fingers were long and deft as he tore a piece of bread. He finished. He looked at her bowl, untouched. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He said nothing. He simply stood, took his bowl in hers, and left. When he came the next morning, he brought only one bowl, his own. Emma watched, her stomach twisting into a painful knot, as he sat and ate his breakfast. He did not offer her anything. He did not even look at her. The lesson was brutal and clear. He would not force her to eat, but he would not provide food to be wasted. If she would not eat, she would not be fed. This was not cruelty. It was the law of his world. Waste was death. When he finished, he stood to leave. "Please," Emma cried out, the word torn from her. He paused, his back to her. "Please," she said again, pointing to his empty bowl, then to her own stomach. She hated the desperation in her own voice, the weakness. He turned slowly. His face was unreadable, a mask of carved brownstone. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. He was not looking at a white woman or a captive. He was looking at a creature that was, perhaps, finally learning the rules. He left without a sound. 10 minutes later, Sani appeared. She threw a piece of cold fry bread onto the floor at Emma's feet. Emma snatched it up, her pride completely gone, and ate, tears of humiliation stinging her eyes. The next time Kiowa brought food, she ate. This became their routine. He would bring the food, and they would sit in the smoky silence, two people from different planets, sharing a small, confined space. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire or the shifting of his weight. Emma began to study him, her fear slowly giving way to a desperate, consuming curiosity. He was not a monster. He was not a simple savage. He was a man, and he was profoundly sad. She saw it when he thought she was not watching. His face, when at rest, settled into lines of deep, enduring grief. She saw him touch a small, beaded pouch he wore on a thong around his neck, his eyes closing for just a second, his expression so raw with loss that she had to look away. She began to understand that his harshness was not directed at her. It was his world. It was the armor he wore against the grief she saw in his eyes. He was a man who had lost things. She decided to break the silence. He brought the evening meal. As he sat, she pointed to the water jug Sani had left. "Water," she said, her voice small. He glanced at her, his expression unchanged. She pointed again. "Water." He seemed to understand she was naming it. "Two," he said. His voice was rough, the word short and deep. "Two," she repeated. Her pronunciation was clumsy. A flicker of something surprise annoyance crossed his face. He nodded once. She gained a small burst of courage. She pointed to the bread in his hand. "Bread." "Naan," he said. "Naan." He pointed to the stew. "Atzi." "Atzi." She would learn later it meant meat. It was a beginning. It was not a conversation. It was a trading of sounds, but it was the first time she had felt like a person since her capture. The next day, he motioned for her to come out of the hogan. Emma froze. The blanket was pulled aside, and the bright, cold sunlight of the canyon blinded her. The guard who was usually there had stepped aside. Kiowa was waiting, his arms crossed. He jerked his head. "Come." She emerged, trembling, into the open air of the camp. It was loud. Dogs barked, children shouted and ran in a game that involved a small hoop. Women called to each other from their looms. Everyone stopped to stare at her. Emma felt her skin burn. She was on display, wearing their clothes. She was a trophy. Kiowa seemed oblivious to the stares. He began to walk toward the edge of the camp, where the horses were kept. He expected her to follow. She stumbled after him, her head down, avoiding the eyes of the women, who tracked her with open hostility. Sani, in particular, watched her from across the camp, her mouth set in a thin, hard line. Kiowa was checking his horse, a lean bay with intelligent eyes. He ran his hands down its legs, checking for heat, for swelling. He spoke to the horse in a low, gentle murmur, a voice so different from the one he used with her that it made her stop. It was the voice of a man speaking to a beloved friend. Emma stood awkwardly, unsure what she was supposed to do. She was his prisoner, his shadow. A mangy, yellow-furred dog, drawn by her stillness, trotted over. It sniffed at the hem of her skirt. Then, sensing her fear, it wrinkled its nose and let out a low growl. Emma gasped and jumped back, a small, terrified sound. At the mission, she had been taught that animals were unclean, base. A dog was a thing of filth and potential violence. The dog, encouraged by her retreat, barked, a sharp, aggressive sound. Kiowa turned. He saw the dog. He saw Emma, pressed back against the canyon wall, her hands at her throat, her face pale with terror. His own face darkened with a profound, weary contempt. He did not shout. He simply said one low word. The dog instantly tucked its tail, flattened its ears, and slunk away. Kiowa looked at Emma. He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief. He pointed at the retreating dog, then at her, and said something in Navajo. The tone was not kind. It was mocking. Emma understood the look, if not the words. He thought she was a fool. He thought she was weak, pathetic. Anger, hot and sudden, eclipsed her fear. She was not weak. She was terrified. She was alone. She was in a place where nothing made sense, where the man who had saved her life looked at her with contempt for being afraid of a dog. "It is not my world," she said, her voice shaking. She pointed back toward the east, toward the mission she had hated but now desperately missed. "My world is not this. I do not know. This—" He just stared at her, not understanding her cascade of English. He saw only her flushed face, her trembling hands. He saw a woman who was as fragile as a dry leaf. He could not understand how her people survived. The Bilagana were soft, weak, afraid of the earth itself. Yet they came with thundersticks in endless numbers, claiming the land from people who knew how to live on it. It was a contradiction that baffled and angered him. He dismissed her with a gesture of his hand, as if she were a child. He turned back to his horse. The humiliation stung Emma more than Sunny's hatred. She wanted to throw something at his broad, dismissive back. Instead, she stood, rooted to the spot, her hands clenched into fists, her body vibrating with a helpless rage. She would not be weak. She would not let him see her as weak. She spent the next few days in a state of quiet fury. She began to truly watch. She watched how the women ignored her, but also how they worked. They built the fires. They hauled the water. They butchered the game the men brought back. They were strong, their hands capable, their laughter loud. They were nothing like the pale, whispering Sister Agnes. They were free. This realization shook her to her core. She, in her gray mission dress, had been the prisoner long before Kiowa had thrown her on his horse. These women, in their bright skirts, were captives of no man. She needed to do something. She could not just sit in the hogan and wait. She did not know what Tall Salt and the others planned for her, but she knew she could not endure this passivity. Sani was weaving at a large, upright loom, the shuttle flying back and forth, a complex pattern of red and gray emerging from the wool. Emma, desperate for any task, approached her slowly. Sani saw her coming and stopped, her face hardened. Emma pointed to the loom, then to her own hands. She tried to pantomime a request to help. Sani let out a short, harsh laugh. She said something in Navajo. Spitting the words like venom, she made a shooing gesture, as if Emma were a chicken. "Go away." Emma flushed and retreated, the stares of the other women following her. Kiowa had been watching from the shadow of his hogan, where he was refletching a set of arrows. He had seen the entire exchange. He saw the humiliation on Emma's face and the satisfaction on Sani's. He felt the familiar knot of irritation. The woman was his responsibility. His people looked down on him for his strange defense of her. Sani's public mockery of her was a mockery of him. He put down his arrow. He walked over to Sani. He did not raise his voice. He spoke to the old woman, his words low and rapid. Emma could not understand them, but she saw Sani's expression change from triumph to shocked anger, and then to a grudging, resentful submission. Sani argued back, her voice rising, but Kiowa cut her off with a final, sharp command. Sani threw her shuttle to the ground and stalked away from the loom, disappearing into her hogan. Kiowa stood for a moment, the tension clear in the set of his shoulders. He had defended her again, and in doing so, had deepened the rift between himself and his clan. He turned to Emma. She expected him to order her back to the hogan. Instead, he walked to where a pile of hides was curing. He picked up a pair of badly torn moccasins and a length of sinew. He grabbed a sharp, pointed awl made of bone. He walked to Emma and dumped them unceremoniously in her lap. She stared at the items, confused. He pointed to a rip in the leather. Then he mimed the motion of sewing, of pulling the sinew through the hole. He looked at her. Work. She picked up the awl. It was heavy, sharp. She looked at the tough leather. She had only ever mended thin linen. She tried to push the awl through the hide. It would not go. She pushed harder, gritting her teeth. It slipped, raking a bloody line across her thumb. She cried out, a sharp intake of breath, and dropped the tool. putting her bleeding thumb in her mouth. Kiowa let out a long, suffering sigh. The sound was pure exasperation. He sat on his heels in front of her. He snatched the moccasin from her. In one swift, powerful motion, he punched the awl through the leather. He pulled it out, threaded the sinew, and pulled the stitch tight. He handed it all back to her. He pointed again. Emma looked at her bleeding thumb, then at his impassive face. He was not going to comfort her. He was not going to praise her. He was demanding that she do. She took the awl. Her hand was trembling. She set her jaw. She placed the point on the leather and pushed. It resisted. She pushed harder, using all her weight. The bone bit into her palm, but the point went through. She pulled it out and threaded the sinew. The first stitch was clumsy, ugly. She looked at him. He merely pointed at the next spot. Again. She did it again and again. She worked for nearly an hour. Her hands clumsy, her stitches uneven, her thumb throbbed, and her palm was raw. But she was mending the shoe. When she was finished, she held it up. It was a terrible piece of work, puckered and rough. Kiowa took it from her. He inspected it, turning it over in his hands. He tested her stitches with his thumb. They were ugly, but they were strong. They would hold. He looked at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her brow furrowed with concentration. She was not the weak, terrified woman from the canyon wall. She was not the passive doll from the mission. She was a person who was trying. For the first time, his expression softened, not into a smile, but into something less harsh, a flicker of respect. He nodded once, a sharp, clear gesture of approval. Emma felt a strange, dizzying warmth spread through her chest. It was a more powerful feeling than any prayer, any word of praise she had ever received from Sister Agnes. It was the approval of a man she should have hated. He stood and walked away. Taking the moccasin with him, Emma was left sitting in the sun, her hands bleeding and sore, but her spirit strangely, fiercely, alive. She was learning a new language, one that was not made of words, but of action, of resilience, and of a shared, silent understanding. She was still a prisoner, but she no longer felt entirely trapped. She was, for the first time in her life, beginning to feel free. The small, raw spot on Emma's thumb had just begun to heal when the world tore open again. The act of mending the moccasin had earned her a new status, though it was one she had not asked for. Kiowa no longer kept her confined to the hogan. The guard was removed. She was allowed to move about the camp, a strange satellite to Kiowa's movements. He gave her tasks, simple, hard, mindless work. She hauled water from the deep, cold spring at the end of the canyon. She gathered firewood, her arms aching from the weight. She scraped hides, a disgusting, difficult job that left her hands raw and her stomach churning. Sani and the other women still watched her with hatred. She was Kiowa's pet, the Bilagana he protected. But the mockery had lessened. Her willingness to work, her refusal to complain, had earned her a sliver of grudging acknowledgement. She was still the enemy, still the cause of their trouble, but she was not the soft, useless doll they had first assumed. She and Kiowa still ate together, their silence now filled with the new words they were teaching each other. Tzil, mountain, chill, plant, ko, fire. He was a patient, if gruff, teacher. He would point, say the word once, and expect her to remember. She, in turn, tried to teach him sun, moon, sky. He would listen, his head tilted, his tongue stumbling over the flat English sounds. He seemed to find her language clumsy, full of unnecessary noise. It was a fragile piece, a small bubble of routine in a world at war. And one afternoon, the bubble burst. A warrior, his horse lathered in sweat, galloped into the camp. He did not slow down, but rode straight to Tall Salt's hogan, shouting as he went, Bilagana. The word was a gunshot. Navajo soldiers. The camp exploded. It was not panic. It was a terrifying, practiced efficiency. Women doused fires, grabbed children, and began running toward hidden trails in the canyon wall. Men grabbed rifles and bows, their faces instantly hardening into the warrior's mask. Kiowa appeared at Emma's side as if from the earth itself. He had been on the canyon rim, on watch. He grabbed her arm. His face was stark, his eyes burning. "They come," he said, using one of the few English words she had taught him. "Come." "Who?" she asked, her heart seizing. "Soldiers." He said the word in English, and it sounded like a curse. Tall Salt was shouting orders. Kiowa pulled her toward the horses. He was speaking to her in a fast, low stream of Navajo. She could not understand the words, only the urgency. He was not taking her to the women and children. He was taking her with him. The first rifle shots echoed from the canyon mouth, sharp cracks that bounced off the rock walls. Bullets whined, impossibly high, over the camp. "Kiowa!" Tall Salt's voice was a roar. He pointed at Emma. "The Bilagana, she is the cause." "She is my responsibility," Kiowa shouted back, throwing a blanket and a saddle onto his horse. "Leave her," Hastian, the young, hot-blooded warrior, yelled. He had his rifle in his hand. "She is what they came for. Give her to them." "No." The word was a raw tear in the air. Kiowa did not know why he said it. It was madness. She was the cause. Tall Salt's plan to trade her had backfired. The fort had not wanted to trade, it had wanted revenge. He pulled Emma onto his horse, throwing her up behind him, just as he had done that first day. But this time, she did not weep. She locked her arms around his waist, her face pressed into his back, her body rigid with a fear that was cold and sharp. The soldiers were pouring into the canyon mouth, a wave of blue uniforms. They were firing at everything that moved, at the Hogans, at the women, at the dogs. Kiowa spurred his horse, not toward the hidden trail where the main group was escaping, but toward a narrow, treacherous game trail that led straight up the opposite cliff face. It was faster, but it was more exposed. He had no choice. The soldiers were between him and the others. He and 3 other warriors split from the main defense, firing back as they rode, trying to draw the soldiers' attention, to give the women and children time. Emma clung to him, her eyes squeezed shut. She could hear the bullets, a sound like angry hornets, passing them. She could feel the horse straining, its hooves scrambling on the loose rock. She could feel the heat of Kiowa's body, the tension in his muscles. He was a wall of muscle and buckskin, and she hid behind him. She felt a strange, terrible detachment. She was a white woman, wearing Navajo clothes, being carried away by a Navajo warrior, while white soldiers tried to kill them both. She belonged nowhere. She was the target. If the soldiers caught them, they would see her. A white woman with a savage. They would kill her. If Kiowa's own men had their way, like Hastian, they would have left her behind as a sacrifice. She was truly, completely alone, except for the man whose arm she was clinging to. They reached the rim of the canyon, the horse's lungs heaving. Kiowa did not pause. He rode into the high, broken country, a landscape of twisted juniper and knife-edged rock. The other 3 warriors were with them. They rode hard for an hour, then 2, pushing the horses to their limit. The sky, which had been a clear, cold blue, was turning a bruised, heavy gray. The wind picked up, carrying the first stinging ice crystals of a storm. Winter, which had held its breath, was finally exhaling. They stopped in a deep arroyo, the horses trembling with exhaustion. "We cannot stay." One of the warriors, a man named Little Eagle, said, "They will follow our tracks. The snow will cover them." Kiowa said, his eyes on the darkening sky, "The snow will kill us." The third man, Long Mustache, said. He was older, his face grim. "We are exposed. We have no blankets, no food." Kiowa looked at Emma. She was shaking, her face pale. Her lips blue. She was not made for this. She was not made for the cold, for the hard riding. He felt a surge of his old irritation. She was a burden. He had been a fool to save her, a fool to bring her. "We split up," Kiowa said. "They will follow 4 horses, but 2 and 2, we can lose them. Go south, toward the Chuska Mountains. I will go west, toward the empty quarter." Little Eagle nodded. It was a good plan. "And the Bilagana?" "She stays with me," Kiowa said. His voice was flat. It allowed no argument. Long Mustache looked at Emma with open contempt. "She will slow you. She will be your death." "She is my responsibility?" Kiowa said again. The words tasted like ash. "Go, do ash. Go now." The 3 warriors shared a look. They respected Kiowa, but they thought he was insane. They mounted their horses and, without a word, rode south, disappearing into the thickening snow. Kiowa was alone with her. The silence that fell was vast, broken only by the whine of the wind and the horses' ragged breathing. Where did they go?" Emma asked, her teeth chattering. "Away," Kiowa said. He pulled the blanket from the horse's back. It was thin, meant for under a saddle. He ripped it in 2. He handed 1/2 to her. "This." She wrapped it around her shoulders. It was a meager warmth. "We must walk," he said. "The horse is done." He began to lead the horse, pulling it into the teeth of the wind. Emma stumbled after him. The snow was coming faster now, a thick, white curtain that erased the world. They walked for what felt like hours. The high desert landscape was gone, replaced by a suffocating, featureless white. Emma's thin moccasins, the ones Sani had given her, were soaked through in minutes. Her feet were numb. Then they began to ache with a deep, burning cold. She fell. She was too tired, too cold. She just dropped to her knees in the snow. I cannot go on." Kiowa turned. He was a dark shape in the blizzard. He came back to her. His face was caked with snow, his expression invisible. He looked down at her, a miserable, half-frozen bundle. He could leave her. It would be so simple. He could leave her, and his problem would be solved. The soldiers would find her body in the spring. He could go on, find his people. "Get up," he said. "I cannot." She was weeping, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "Let me die. It is better." "Get up," he roared, his voice ripped away by the wind. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh, and hauled her to her feet. "You are not dying here. Che diga. Get up." He half dragged, half carried her. He was a man of impossible strength. He pushed on, his head down, one hand on the horse's reins, the other gripping her arm. He was pulling 2 burdens now. He found it by sheer luck, or by the deep knowledge of the land he carried in his bones, a low shadow in the white. A shallow overhang of rock on the side of a small mesa. It was not a cave, but it was shelter. It broke the wind. He pushed her inside, into the small, dry space under the rock. He brought the horse in as well, settling it at the mouth of the shelter, where its body would provide a further break against the wind. The animal was trembling, its coat thick with ice. Kiowa collapsed next to Emma. They were both breathing in great, ragged gasps. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They were just 2 creatures, huddled against the storm, fighting for life. Will they find us?" Emma finally whispered. Kiowa was scraping snow from his buckskins. "No, this snow is a gift. It hides our tracks. They will go back, or they will freeze." He began to work, his movements stiff with cold. He took his knife and began to shave dry wood from the inside of a dead juniper branch he had grabbed on the way in. He built a small, careful pile of shavings. He took a flint and steel from his pouch. Emma watched his hands, his scarred, brown hands. As they worked, they were shaking, but they were sure. He struck the flint. A spark. Another. A spark caught the dry tinder. He blew on it, a gentle, steady breath, cupping the tiny flame. He added larger twigs. A small, brave fire began to crackle. It was a miracle. He fed it, and the small shelter filled with a smoky, life-giving warmth. Emma edged closer to it, her whole body shaking in a violent ague. She held her hands out, so close she almost touched the flames. Kiowa sat back on his heels. He was watching her, his expression grim. "You are weak," he stated. It was not an insult, it was a fact. "I am cold," she retorted, her spirit returning with the warmth. "You are weak," he said again. "At the mission, you sit inside, you pray to your sky god. You do not walk, you do not work. Your hands are soft." "My hands are not soft," she said, stung, holding up her palms. They were calloused from the work he had given her, the skin cracked and bleeding. He looked at them, and his expression flickered. He acknowledged her point with a slight incline of his head. "Better," he conceded. "But you are still weak. You fell, you gave up." I have never been so cold," she whispered, the fight leaving her. "In my whole life, I thought my heart would stop." He nodded. "This is our world. The world is hard. It does not care if you are cold. It does not care if you are weak. You live or you die. Praying does not help." "My faith helps me," she said, though the words sounded hollow, even to her. Sister Agnes's sermons about sin and hellfire seemed like stories for children, completely irrelevant to the reality of freezing to death in a blizzard. "Your faith?" he asked. He knew the word. The missionaries had come to his people, too. "Your God let the soldier take you. Your God let the other soldiers come. They burn my home. They kill my people. Where is your God now?" "Where is yours?" she shot back. "Where are your gods in this storm?" He smiled. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile, and it was a terrible, beautiful thing. It was a smile of pure, bitter irony. "They are right here," he said. He tapped his chest. "In me. In my breath." He touched the stone wall of the shelter. "In the rock." He pointed to the fire. "In the co." He looked out at the storm. "And they are in the snow. They are the storm. They are not kind. They are just real. They teach us. They are teaching you now. You must be strong, or you die." She stared at him, at the firelight playing over the harsh planes of his face. She was not talking to a savage. She was talking to a man with a faith far deeper and more terrifying than her own. A faith that was woven into the fabric of the world itself. Why did you save me?" she asked, the question that had lived in her heart since the first day. "At the fort, why did you kill that man? And why did you take me?" He was silent for a long time, feeding sticks to the fire. "He was a coward," he said at last, his voice low. "He used you as a shield. It is not the way. It is ugly. I did not think. I just acted." "And you took me," she pressed. "Why, your people hate me. They want to trade me. Hastian wanted to leave me. Why did you bring me?" He looked up, and his eyes met hers. The grief she had always seen in them was there, but it was raw now, open. "I do not know," he said, the admission torn from him. "You are Bilagana. You are the people who took everything." He touched the pouch at his neck. "My wife, my son, they died of the coughing sickness. The soldiers brought it. My brother, they shot him. For nothing. You are them." Emma flinched as if he had struck her. I did not do those things." "You are their color," he said, his voice flat, full of a pain so deep it was bottomless. "I am an orphan," she whispered, her own story spilling out, a tiny, pale story next to his bloody one. I have no people. The mission, it was a place to stay, a prison. I was a servant. I had nothing. I am nothing. I am just me." He stared at her, absorbing this. He saw her, truly saw her, for the first not as a symbol, not as a white woman, an enemy, a burden. He saw a person, an orphan, a woman with no clan, no people, a woman as lost as he was. "You are not nothing," he said, his voice rough. "You are. You are here." He saw the resilience he had mistaken for fragility. He saw the stubbornness that had made her refuse his clothes, and the will that had made her learn to sew the moccasin. He saw the intelligence in her eyes as she learned his language, as she watched his world. He had thought her weak, a creature of soft walls and soft faith. He had been wrong. She was a survivor. Just like him, she had survived the mission. She had survived the attack. She was, against all odds, surviving this storm. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small, wrinkled piece of dried meat. It was all he had. He held it out to her. Emma looked at the offering. It was more than food. It was a treaty. It was an acknowledgement. She took it from his hand. Their fingers brushed. The contact was a tiny spark, like the flint on steel, warm in the vast, freezing cold. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. He replied in Navajo, "Hos-ho." It was a word she did not know, but she heard the meaning. It is good. It is in balance. They sat in silence, sharing the small, tough piece of meat as the blizzard raged outside their small shelter. They were no longer captor and captive. They were two people, huddled by a fire, and the world was trying to kill them both. And in that shared danger, a new, fragile, and dangerous connection had been forged. The blizzard broke with the dawn, leaving a world scoured clean and stunningly silent. The snow had stopped, but the cold had intensified. It was no longer a thing of wind and motion. It was a static, heavy presence that pressed in from all sides, a clear, sharp, crystalline cold that seemed to suck the very breath from their lungs. The sky was a pale, hard blue, and the sun, when it rose, was a white disk offering light but no warmth. They were alive. That was the first miracle. Kiowa had risen before the light, his movements stiff. He had checked the horse, which stood in the shelter of the overhang, its coat thick with frost, its breathing a cloud of white vapor. It had survived. The second miracle. He had returned to the small, dead fire and looked at Emma. She was huddled in her half of the torn saddle blanket, her knees drawn to her chest, her face pale and pinched. She looked at him, her eyes wide, dark pools of exhaustion in her small face. The understanding that had passed between them in the storm was still there, a fragile, unspoken thing. "We must go," he said, his voice a low rasp. "This place is a grave. The soldiers, they will be back." "Back," she whispered, her voice cracking. "In this they will freeze." "They will send scouts," he said, his gaze distant, already scanning the white landscape. "They are like ants. They always come back, and they will look for smoke." He gestured to the dead fire. "No more. Not until night. We walk." The day was a long, slow torture. The world was a blinding expanse of white, broken only by the black skeletons of juniper trees and the dark red of canyon walls. Kiowa led, leading the horse, which now carried their few belongings, his empty rifle scabbard, the saddle, and the heavy, oiled canvas roll that was his bedroll. He had not used it in the storm, as if saving it. Emma followed in his footsteps. Literally. She stepped in the deep holes he made in the snow, her legs aching with the effort. Every breath was a pain, a small, sharp knife in her chest. The high altitude and the bitter cold worked on her, thinning her blood, stealing her strength. He was a machine. He never seemed to tire. He moved with a steady, ground-covering rhythm, his eyes constantly scanning, reading the subtle shifts in the snow, the lay of the land, the way the wind had drifted. He was looking for shelter, but he was also looking for enemies. He was a man entirely in his element, a land that was doing its best to kill him. He seemed to take a grim satisfaction in denying it. Emma, on the other hand, was an alien. She was a soft thing, made for rooms and walls, and this vast, terrible beauty was an enemy she could not fight. She focused on one thing, the back of his buckskin-clad legs. She would watch them move, one after the other. As long as he moved, she had to move. When he stopped, she could stop. He stopped only twice. Once to let the horse rest and eat a handful of dry grass he uncovered beneath the snow on a windswept ridge, and once to look at Emma. He saw her swaying, her face as white as the snow around them. She was finished. She was walking on pride alone, and it was failing. He said nothing. He just stopped, untied the heavy buffalo robe from his saddle, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, stiff with the cold, but it smelled of him, of wood smoke and leather, and a faint, musky scent of the man himself. It was a profound comfort. He turned and kept walking. Near dusk, he found what he had been looking for. It was not a cave, but a dense thicket of ancient pine trees, growing so close together that their lower branches formed a natural roof. The ground beneath them was a deep, dry carpet of brown needles, untouched by the snow. It was a small, hidden pocket of life in the white death of the landscape. "Here," he said. He settled the horse, rubbing its legs down with a handful of snow to get the circulation moving, then covering it with its own saddle blanket. He gave it the last of the oats from his saddlebag. Emma sank to the carpet of needles, her legs folding beneath her. She was too tired to move, too cold to shiver. The buffalo robe was a heavy weight. Kiowa set to work. He did not build a fire in the open. He dug a small pit, a foot deep, and lined it with rocks he pulled from the base of a tree. He used his flint and steel on a piece of tinder he kept in his medicine pouch, and soon a tiny, almost smokeless fire was burning at the bottom of the pit. It was a hunter's fire, designed to give heat without giving them away. The sun vanished. The last pale light in the sky went from yellow to green to a deep, star-filled indigo, and the temperature plummeted. The cold of the day had been a warning. The cold of the night was a threat. It was a living thing, a predator, and it was stalking their small, sheltered camp. They sat on either side of the small pit, their hands extended over the tiny, glowing coals. The heat barely reached their knees. The rest of their bodies were encased in ice. "Eat," Kiowa said. He had gone out in the twilight and returned with 3 rabbits, snared in traps he had set as they walked. He had skinned them with a few deft, economical motions of his knife, and roasted them over the coals. He handed her a piece. It was meat, hot, it burned her mouth, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. They ate in silence, the only sound the faint crackle of the fire and the tearing of the meat. They were the sum of the day's long, brutal battle. They had fought the cold, and they had fought the landscape. They had survived. When the meal was over, the true cold set in. The fire was dying, reduced to embers to avoid any light. The horse stamped its feet, its breath a rattling sound in its chest. Emma began to shiver. It started in her hands and feet and moved inward, until her whole body was shaking in a violent, uncontrollable tremor. Her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. This was not the shivering of discomfort. This was the body beginning to fail. Kiowa watched her. His face was in shadow, unreadable. He sat for a long time, as still as the stones around them. He was making a calculation. Finally, he stood. He took his heavy buffalo robe, the one she was still wrapped in, and spread it fully on the driest patch of pine needles. It was huge, a single, heavy, cured hide, thick with fur. It was made for one man. He sat down on one side of it. He looked at her. He did not speak. He did not order her. He did not beckon. He simply sat, holding his half of the torn saddle blanket, and looked at her. Emma understood. Her mind recoiled in a white-hot flash of panic. This was impossible. This was a sin. She was a white woman, a Christian woman raised to be pure. He was a heathen, a savage. He was a man. To lie beside him, under a single blanket, it was an abomination. She could hear Sister Agnes's voice, sharp and cold, speaking of hellfire. She looked away from him, pulling her own small, inadequate piece of the saddle blanket tighter. She would sit up. She would sit by the fire. She would pray. She would survive. The cold laughed at her. It bit through her clothes, through the blanket, into her very marrow. The shivering became a convulsion. She could not breathe for the shaking. She knew, with the same terrible certainty she had felt in the blizzard, that she was going to die. If she sat here, alone, she would be frozen solid by morning. He knew it, too. He was watching her, his patience a tangible thing. He was not forcing her. He was giving her the choice. Pride or life, her world or his. She looked at him. He was not a savage. He was the man who had given her his food. He was the man who had taught her to be strong. He was the man who had covered her with his own robe while he walked in the cold. He was not her captor. He was her protector, and he was offering her the only thing he had left to give his own life, his own heat. The tears that came to her eyes froze instantly on her lashes. She could not choose death. She had fought too hard to live. Slowly, her movements stiff and agonizing, she crawled from her side of the fire pit and sat on the far edge of the buffalo robe. She lay down, her back to him, her body as rigid as a plank of wood. She was on the robe, but she was not touching him. She pulled her fragment of blanket over her, a useless, symbolic shield. The cold in the space between them was worse than the air outside. It was a tangible void. Kiowa lay down on his side, his back also to her. He was a large, solid presence in the dark, but he was separate. He was respecting her boundaries, even as they were both freezing. It was not enough. The cold was winning. Emma's shivering was so violent she felt her ribs would crack. She heard him sigh, a rough sound of exasperation. He was not angry, he was just tired. Tired of her fear, tired of the rules of her world that did not apply here. He shifted. He sat up, the robe falling away from him. Emma tensed, thinking he would grab her. He did not. He simply reached over, and with an impersonal, undeniable strength, he took her by the shoulder and pulled her back against him. It was not a gentle act. It was not a cruel one. It was practical. It was final. He lay back down, pulling her with him, fitting her back against his front. He was like a furnace. The heat of his body was a shock, a jolt that was almost painful. He was on his side, and she was pressed against the full length of him, his chest against her back, his legs against hers. He reached over her, grabbed the heavy edge of the buffalo robe, and lifted it. He pulled it over both of them, tucking it in around her shoulders, sealing them together in a small, dark, warm cocoon. He had waited. He had waited for her skin to touch, but she had been too afraid. So he had made the choice for her. Emma lay there, rigid, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could feel it against his ribs. She was pressed against a man who was not her husband, a man who was her enemy. She could feel his steady, slow breathing. She could feel the solid, living muscle of his chest, the warmth of his legs. She was trapped, and she had never, in her entire life, felt so profoundly safe. The shivering began to subside, replaced by a slow, aching, thawing sensation. She lay there for a long time, her mind screaming, her body sinking into the warmth. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was a tiny, broken whisper in the vast, cold dark. "It's cold tonight." She felt him nod, his chin brushing the top of her hair. He did not speak. He just lay there, a solid, warm wall behind her. They did not speak again. There was only the silence of the frozen world outside, The sound of the wind moving high in the pine tops, and the intimate, shocking sound of their shared breath. Emma felt the last of her old world fall away. It was a brittle, hollow thing. Sister Agnes's rules, the fort's judgment, the very idea of sin, it all seemed like a story from a faraway land, a story for people who had never been truly cold, truly hungry, or truly afraid. At the mission, love was a word in a book, a dangerous, abstract concept. Marriage was a transaction, a way for a woman to be owned. Affection was a weakness of the flesh. This, she realized, was none of those things. This was real. This was a man who had seen her at her weakest, her most pathetic, and had not pitied her, but had demanded her strength. He had shared his last piece of meat. He had protected her from his own people and from hers. And now, he was sharing his body heat, offering his life to save hers, without a single word of barter or demand. She understood. This was connection. This was not a calculation. It was not a bargain. It was a bond forged in fire and ice and a shared will to survive. It was the simple, profound, and terrifying touch of two souls who had nothing and no one but each other. Slowly, her rigid spine began to soften. Her muscles, which had been locked in fear, began to unclench. The warmth was no longer just a comfort. It was a profound, healing peace. Her hand, which had been clenched into a fist at her chest, relaxed. Her fingers uncurled, and her cold skin brushed the back of his hand, which lay on the robe between them. He did not move. He did not pull away. His hand was there, warm and solid. Emma closed her eyes. The terror was gone. The cold was gone. She was warm, and she was alive. She shifted, her body moving almost unconsciously, pressing closer to the source of the heat, her head finding the natural hollow of his shoulder. She fell asleep, not as a captive, but as a person who had finally, in the middle of a frozen wasteland, found a place to rest. They found the remnants of their people 7 days later. The snow had receded under a warming sun, leaving the high desert wet and scarred, the air smelling of pine and damp earth. Kiowa had tracked them, a faint, desperate trail of a people moving fast, moving wounded. He found them in a box canyon, a temporary, miserable camp, nothing like the settled, orderly home they had lost. The reunion was stark. Tall Salt was alive, his arm bound in a bloody sling. Hastian was there, his face a mask of fury and grief. Many were missing. The women, Sani among them, were huddled together, their faces gaunt. They had lost everything: their homes, their stores of food, their blankets. The army had burned it all. When they saw Kiowa, there was relief. When they saw Emma, there was a new, cold hatred. "You!" Hastian spat, walking toward them, his rifle in his hand. "He brought her back. He saved her while our people died." Sani's face was a ruin of despair. She looked at Emma, and the look was not just hatred. It was an accusation that went to the bone. "She is the cause," Hastian said, his voice rising, cracking. "She is the Bilagana ghost who has brought this upon us. She must be given to them, left for them. A sacrifice." "No," Kiowa said. He stepped in front of Emma, his hand on his knife. He was weary to his soul, his body aching from the cold and the long trek, but his voice was iron. "You defy the people?" Tall Salt asked, his voice weak, tired. "Look, Kiowa, look what one woman has cost us." "The woman cost us nothing," Kiowa said, his voice ringing in the cold, quiet canyon. "The soldiers did this. The Bilagana did this. Because we are dying. Because we sit on land they want. She is not the cause. She is an excuse. I will not let you use her." He looked at Hastian. "If you want her, you must kill me." A terrible silence fell. Hastian stared at Kiowa, his chest heaving. He was young, strong. Kiowa was tired, but Hastian could not do it. He could not kill the man who had taught him to hunt, the man who was his brother in all but blood. Hastian let out a raw cry of frustration and turned away, slamming his rifle butt against the rock wall. Kiowa had won, but he had split his world in two. He was no longer just a protector of the people. He was the protector of her. And in their eyes, the two were now in conflict. He took Emma to a small, cold shelter under an overhang, away from the others. He gave her his buffalo robe, the one they had shared. He built her a fire. He sat with his back to the camp, guarding her, a man caught between two loyalties that were tearing him apart. Life settled into a new, grim routine. The camp was not a home. It was a fugitive hiding place. The warriors hunted, but game was scarce. The women foraged for roots. The mood was dark, full of fear and anger. Emma was an outcast, isolated by a wall of silent hatred. Only Kiowa spoke to her. Their bond, forged in the blizzard, became their only shelter. He would bring her food, and they would eat together, their conversation low and halting, a mix of his broken English and her growing Navajo. He taught her which roots were safe to eat, how to read the sky for weather. She mended his torn buckskins, her stitches now neat and strong. She would watch him as he sat, sharpening his knife, his face lost in a sadness that she now understood. She would, without thinking, reach out and touch his arm, a small, grounding gesture. He would cover her hand with his, just for a moment, his thumb brushing her skin. It was in this fragile, wounded quiet that the army found them again. They had been careless, a hunting party, desperate, had gone too far and had been seen. The Bilagana had trackers, Apache scouts, enemies of the Dine, who could read a trail as well as Kiowa. This time there was no warning. It was not a raid. It was a full-scale assault. They came at dawn, soldiers on horseback pouring over both rims of the canyon, catching the small band in a perfect, brutal crossfire. They did not shout. They simply began to shoot. It was a massacre. The air exploded. Bullets ripped through blankets, through the thin canvas shelters. A woman screamed. A sound cut short. Men grabbed their weapons, firing back, but it was hopeless. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Kiowa was already moving. He had slept with his rifle. He burst from their shelter, pulling Emma with him. "Run!" he yelled, shoving her toward the back of the canyon, where a narrow crevice offered the only escape. "Run with the women! Do not stop!" He turned back to the fight. He saw Tall Salt go down, his chest a mass of red. He saw Hastian, fighting by the fire, firing, reloading, firing, his face a mask of pure, glorious rage, until 3 bullets hit him at once. Kiowa fired, his movements fluid, mechanical. He shot a soldier from his horse. He fired again. Another fell. He was not fighting for victory. He was fighting for time. He was fighting for Emma to get away. He fell back, retreating toward the crevice. The women and children were scrambling into it, Sani among them, pushing the young ones ahead. Emma ran. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She did not want to leave him. She looked back. He was there, a solid, deadly presence, firing, then moving, always keeping himself between her and the soldiers. She reached the crevice. Sani was there, at the mouth, her face streaked with tears and soot. The old woman looked at Emma, her eyes filled with a universe of hate. "Go!" Emma screamed, trying to push Sani into the crack. At that moment, a new group of soldiers appeared, coming around the side, cutting them off from the escape route. A young lieutenant led them, his face flushed with victory. "There!" he shouted, pointing at Emma. Sani, in a final, astonishing act of defiance, grabbed a burning log from a nearby fire and charged the lieutenant, screaming a Navajo war cry. The lieutenant shot her. She fell without a sound. Emma screamed. She had no weapon. She had nowhere to run. A heavy hand grabbed her hair, yanking her backward. It was a sergeant, a big man with a thick beard and cold, blue eyes. "Well, look what we have here," he said, his voice a low growl. He looked at her white skin, at her Navajo clothes, her braided hair. A race traitor, a squaw. Let me go, Emma shrieked, clawing at his face. He laughed and hit her, a backhanded blow that sent her sprawling to the dirt. You are coming with us. The colonel will want to see this. He grabbed her, his hands brutal, and tied her wrists with a leather thong. He threw her over the front of his saddle. It was a nightmare, repeating. Kiowa saw it all. He saw Sani fall. He saw the sergeant hit Emma. He saw them tie her, take her. He let out a sound. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of an animal, a thing of pure, final agony. He raised his rifle to shoot the sergeant, but the man was already moving. Emma, a shield in front of him. The battle was over. The Navajo were all dead or had fled. The soldiers were rounding up the horses, finishing the wounded. Kiowa was in the shadows of the crevice. They had not seen him. He was safe. He could escape. He could survive. He watched them ride away. He watched them take her, a prisoner, back to their world. He watched until the last blue uniform had disappeared over the canyon rim. He was alone, in a canyon of ghosts. His people were gone. Hastian was gone. Tall Salt was gone. Sani was gone. And she was gone. He sank to his knees, the cold knot of grief he had carried for his wife and son, a grief he had nurtured for years, was suddenly, shockingly, eclipsed by a new, white-hot, and living pain. The old grief was a memory. This was a wound, tearing him open. He could not live in this world without her. The people were gone. His loyalty was now just a memory. She was his only direction. He knew what he had to do. It was madness. It was suicide. He was one man. They were an army. They were in their stone and wood fortress. He did not care. He stood up. His movements were calm, deliberate. He checked his rifle. He had 4 bullets left. He took his knife. He took his bow, and the last of his arrows. He walked to his horse, which he had hidden in the rocks. He would not attack them. Not now. He would follow. He would wait. He was a hunter. He was a shadow, and he would hunt them in their own stone canyon. He would get her back, or he would die in their world. Trying, he mounted his horse and rode east, a single, silent figure following the trail of the victorious army, a man who had lost everything, and therefore had nothing left to fear. The fort was just as she remembered it, but it was no longer a place of refuge. It was a prison. The soldiers dragged her from the horse and paraded her across the central courtyard. They mocked her, whistling and jeering. Look at the Indians, woman. The sergeant tied her, upright, to the flagpole in the center of the parade ground. He left her there, a public spectacle. She stood, her head high, refusing to weep. She was wearing the clothes Kiowa's people had given her. She was covered in the dirt of their destroyed home. She would not give these men the satisfaction of her tears. After an hour, a man in a clean, dark blue uniform approached her. He had graying hair and a severe, cold face. This was Colonel Davies, the new commander. So, he said, his voice clipped, you are the one, the cause of all this trouble, the woman from the mission. I am Emma, she said, her voice hoarse. You are a disgrace, he said simply. We have lost good men looking for you, and we find you, like this, dressed as one of them, living with them. They are dead, she whispered, the horror of the morning washing over her. You killed them all. You killed women. You killed an old man. We eliminated a hostile threat, the colonel said, his eyes like ice. A threat that was harboring a white captive. I was not their captive, Emma said, her voice gaining strength. The colonel raised an eyebrow. Oh, you were there willingly. You chose to live in filth with savages, rather than with your own kind. He saved me, she said, the words tasting like truth. He abducted you, and he corrupted you, the colonel said. But we are civilized men. We will save you from yourself. He turned. Sergeant, cut her down. Take her to the bathhouse. Burn those clothes. Find her a decent dress. She is a white woman, and she will look like one." They cut her loose and dragged her to a small, windowless room. Two soldiers' wives, their faces hard and judgmental, ripped the Navajo clothes from her body. They threw them into a fire. They forced her into a wooden tub of scalding, lye soap water and scrubbed her skin raw, as if they could wash the savage from her. They dressed her in a plain, gray dress, identical to the one she had worn at the mission. They brushed her hair, pulling it so tight in a bun that her scalp ached. She was put in a locked room, a cell. The next morning, the door opened. Sister Agnes stood there. The nun looked older, her face more severe. She looked at Emma with a profound, horrified pity. "My child," she whispered, stepping into the room. "Emma, what has that demon done to you?" Emma looked at the woman who had raised her. She saw the black habit, the cold cross, the pale, clean hands. She had once feared this woman. Now, she felt nothing. "He is not a demon, sister," Emma said. Her voice was quiet, dead. "He took you. He forced you. You must pray. You must cleanse your soul," Sister Agnes insisted, holding out her cross. "The Colonel is merciful. He is sending you back east, away from this wilderness, away from the sin." Emma looked at the cross. She had prayed to that God her whole life, that God had left her in a world of gray walls and cold duty, that God had not saved her from the soldier, that God had not been in the blizzard. "No," Emma said. Sister Agnes froze. "No, what do you mean? No." "I am not going back east," Emma said. She stood up, and for the first time, she was taller than the nun. "I am not ashamed. I am not corrupted." She thought of Kiowa. She thought of his grief, his strength, his harsh kindness. She thought of the cold and the shared warmth of the buffalo robe. That was not sin. That was life. This cold room, this judgment, this was the cage. You choose them," Sister Agnes whispered, her face white. "You choose that, heathen, over your own people, over your God." Emma met her gaze. She had been forced to choose, and in that moment, she knew, with absolute certainty, which world was hers. "He is not a heathen," she said. "He is a man, and he is more civilized than the Colonel. He is more of a Christian than you." Sister Agnes gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She backed out of the room as if Emma had struck her. "You are lost," she breathed. "You are truly lost." The door slammed. The lock turned. Emma was alone again, a prisoner, again. But this time, she knew exactly who she was. She was no longer a pale, frightened orphan. She was a woman who had seen the real world. She looked out the small, barred window toward the western mountains. He was out there. She knew it. He would not leave her. And in the hills, 2 miles away, Kiowa lay flat on the ridge, his eyes fixed on the fort. He watched the woman in black leave the small building. He watched the guard take his post outside the door. He now knew where she was, and he began to plan. Kiowa waited. He lay in the cold darkness of the hills for 2 nights. He did not sleep. He ate the last of his dried meat, his body a single, focused instrument of patience. He was a stone. He was the wind. He was a hunter, and the fort was his prey. He watched the patterns of the guards. He saw them change. He saw their laziness, the way they huddled by the gate fire, the way they walked the wall, their rifles slung, their attention inward, on their own warmth, their own comfort. They were men of walls. They believed the wood and stone kept them safe. They did not understand the shadows. On the 3rd night, the moon was a sliver, and a cold wind rose from the east, bringing the smell of more snow. It was a good wind. It covered sound. He left his horse in a deep, hidden arroyo, hobbled and safe. He took his knife, placing it between his teeth. He took his bow and his 4 remaining arrows. He did not take his rifle. It was too clumsy for this work, and its voice was too loud. This was a night for silence. He moved, not as a man, but as a shadow, a piece of the darkness. He did not approach the main gate. He went to the west wall, the one that faced the endless, empty prairie. It was the lowest, the least guarded. It was built of rough-hewn pine logs, 12 feet high. He reached the base of the wall. He stood for a full minute, listening. He heard the wind, the distant stamp of a horse in the stable, the faint shout of a man near the gate. He used his knife and his hands, finding purchase in the gaps between the logs, in the rough bark. He began to climb. His movements were fluid, silent. He was a spider. He reached the top, his muscles burning from the slow, controlled effort. He lay flat on the narrow walkway, unmoving. A guard was walking toward him, perhaps 50 yards away. The man was a dark shape, his head down, his collar turned up against the wind. Kiowa did not move. The man walked past, his bootsteps heavy. So close, Kiowa could have reached out and touched his leg. The man did not look down. He did not look at the shadows. He was thinking of his bunk, of the fire. Kiowa let him pass. When the guard reached the corner tower and turned his back, Kiowa dropped from the wall into the fort. He landed in a crouch on the hard-packed earth. He was in a dark alley between the stables and the quartermaster's store. He was inside. The first step was done. He moved, a shadow among shadows, his moccasin feet making no sound on the earth. He knew where he was going. He had watched. The small, windowless building behind the colonel's quarters. The one with the guard. He found it. A single soldier stood outside the door, leaning against the wall, his rifle propped beside him. He was trying to roll a cigarette in the wind, cursing under his breath. Kiowa came up behind him from the deepest part of the shadow. The soldier heard nothing. He only felt a hard arm lock around his throat, cutting off his air. He tried to cry out, to struggle, but the grip was iron. Kiowa held him, his body pressed against the soldier's, absorbing the man's brief, violent, silent convulsions. When the man went limp, Kiowa lowered him gently to the ground. He took the man's rifle and pistol. He took the ring of keys from his belt. He turned to the door. It was heavy wood, with a large iron padlock. He tried the keys. The first was wrong. The second, the third. The metal scraped, a loud, ugly sound in the quiet. "Who is there?" Her voice. It was her voice, a terrified whisper from inside. "Emma," he breathed against the wood. "Kiowa." It was a sob, a prayer. He is outside. He sleeps." Kiowa said. He tried the 4th key. It slid into the lock. He turned it. The mechanism gave a loud, heavy clack. He pulled the door open. She was there, a pale shape in the absolute darkness of the cell. She launched herself at him, her arms locking around his neck, her body shaking. "You came." She wept into his shoulder. "You came." He held her for 1 second, his arm crushing her to him. He breathed in her scent, the clean, harsh smell of lye soap, the smell of her. He felt the life, the warmth, the reality of her, the wound in his soul. The one that had opened when he saw her taken, began to close. "We go," he said, his voice rough. He pulled her from him, his hands on her shoulders. "We must be shadows." He gave her the soldier's pistol. She had never held one, and it was heavy, alien in her hand. "You know, this—" I have seen them. I pull this," she asked, pointing at the trigger. "Yes, only if you must. Stay behind me." He picked up the soldier's rifle. He stepped out of the cell, pulling her with him. He looked. The courtyard was empty. The wind was louder. "This way," he whispered, pulling her toward the alley. "The wall, where I came in." They reached the alley. They were 10 steps from the stable. "Halt!" The voice was sharp. From the walkway above them, the guard. The one who had passed Kiowa was on his return walk. He had seen them. Kiowa did not hesitate. He raised the rifle and fired. It was one of his 4 arrows. The bow was silent. The man on the wall grunted, a sound of surprise, and crumpled over the railing, the arrow in his chest. But the damage was done. "Alarm!" a voice shouted from the main gate. "Alarm!" A bugle began to sound, a harsh, frantic tearing of the night. Doors burst open. Men were shouting, running, half-dressed. "Run!" Kiowa yelled. He grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her. They were no longer shadows. They were targets. They ran across the open space toward the west wall. A soldier appeared from the barracks, raising his rifle. Kiowa shoved Emma to the ground and fired the pistol he had taken. The sound was deafening. The soldier fell. "Kiowa!" Emma screamed. He pulled her up. "The wall go." They reached the base of the wall. "Climb," he ordered. "I cannot, it is too high." He put his hands together. "Foot, here, do ash." "Now." She put her foot in his cupped hands. He lifted her, his strength immense, pushing her up the rough logs. She scrambled, her fingers finding holds, her dress tearing. She was halfway up. A volley of shots erupted from the courtyard. Splinters exploded from the log next to her head. Kiowa was at the base of the wall, firing the pistol, giving her cover. He was a perfect target. "Kiowa!" she shrieked, looking down. He was hit. She saw it. He stumbled, his side lurching, as if he had been punched by a giant, invisible fist. A dark stain bloomed on his buckskin shirt. He did not fall. He raised the pistol and fired again. Emptying it, he looked up at her, his face a mask of terrible, agonizing effort. "Climb! Emma!" he roared. His voice was not a plea. It was his last command. "Live!" He put his own hands on the wall and began to climb, his movements now clumsy, pained. He was climbing with his arms, his left leg dragging. Useless. Emma scrambled to the top of the walkway. She lay flat, reaching down for him. "Take my hand, take my hand." He reached the top, his breath coming in great, wet gasps. He did not take her hand. He rolled onto the walkway, his body shaking. "The rope!" he gasped, pointing. The guard he had shot had a coil of rope on his belt. She pulled it free. She was fumbling, her hands slick with a terror she had never known. "They are coming!" a voice shouted from below. Soldiers were at the base of the wall. Kiowa tied the rope around a railing post, his hands surprisingly steady, his movements economical, even in his agony. He had done this 1,000 times. He finished the knot and tossed the end over the side. "You, go!" "No," she wept. "Not without you. I will not leave you." "Go!" He grabbed her, his grip like iron, and pushed her toward the rope. "I am behind you." She looked at him, at the blood now covering his side, at the sweat and pain on his face. She knew he was lying. He would lower her, and he would stay. He would stay and die to buy her time, by her. "Together," she said. "Emma, there is no time." "Together, or I stay. I will not leave you." She meant it. Her old life, the one of inanimation and obedience, was gone. She had found the one thing she would not compromise on. She would not lose him. He looked at her, at the woman in the gray mission dress, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes burning with a strength that matched his own. He had made her this. He had forged this will in the blizzard. A bullet struck the wood near his head. "Foolish woman," he breathed, but it was not an insult. It was a concession. "All right, together." He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, his body shielding hers. "Hold the rope! Do not let go!" He launched them both off the wall. They fell, the rope burning through their hands, a terrible, sliding drop. They hit the frozen ground outside the wall, a tangle of limbs. Emma landed half on top of him. He grunted. a deep, agonizing sound as the impact jarred his wounded body. "Run!" he gasped, pushing her off. "The horse!" He tried to stand and fell to one knee. "Kiowa." I am here." He pushed himself up, leaning on her, his arm draped over her shoulder. His full weight was on her. They began to move, a stumbling, lurching, three-legged run. He was dying. She could feel it. The warmth of his blood was soaking her shoulder. He was losing his strength, his weight becoming impossible. "Leave me," he panted, his steps faltering. "Run! Emma! Live! Please!" "No," she said, her voice a sob of effort. "You will not die. I will not let you. Che diga." She used his own word on him. "Get up." She felt a tremor run through him, a small, pained laugh. "You learn well," he whispered. He found a last reserve of strength. He leaned on her, but he was walking, his left leg dragging. They reached the arroyo. The horse was there, a dark, patient shape. The fort was behind them, a chaos of lights and shouting. They were not being followed. Not yet. The soldiers were confused. Their targets vanished. It took all their strength, hers and his, to get him onto the horse. He was a dead weight, his consciousness fading. He slumped onto the horse's neck. Emma looked at him, at the man who had crossed the world for her, the man who was now dying for her. She was free, but it was a freedom that cost his life. The sense of loss was a physical, crushing weight, heavier than the cold, heavier than her own fear. She pulled herself up behind him, her arms going around his waist to hold him on. She grabbed the reins. "Where?" she whispered, her tears warm on his cold, buckskin-clad back. "Kiowa, where do we go?" He stirred, his head lifting. Just for a second, he was a tracker. He was a guide. His spirit would not let him fail. "West," he breathed. "Always west, to the mountains, till—" His head fell. He was unconscious. Emma looked at the man in her arms. She had told Sister Agnes that he was her protector. She had been wrong. She was his. She thought of her old life. It was a ghost, a story that had happened to someone else. She was no longer Emma of the mission. She could never go back. She was Emma of the Dine, or whatever was left of them. She was his woman. She realized, in that moment of absolute despair, that she loved him. It was not the love of a storybook. It was not the tame, bloodless love of her old faith. It was a fierce, terrible, and demanding love. It was a love that was rooted in shared survival, in respect, and in a bond that had been sealed in a blizzard. He was her people. He was her home. He was her purpose. And she would not let him die. She looked west at the black, jagged line of the mountains against the starry sky. She did not know the way. She did not know what was out there. She was alone, on a stolen horse, with a dying man. She was terrified, and she had never been more certain of what she had to do. "I am here. Kiowa," she whispered to his unconscious back. "I will not leave you. I will get you home." She kicked the horse, turning it away from the fort, away from the world of her birth, and rode, a single, desperate figure, into the vast, freezing, and welcoming dark. The horse moved beneath her, its steps heavy and tired, but it was a strong, steady animal. It was a warrior's horse, and it would not quit. Emma held Kiowa with one arm, her other hand guiding the reins, his blood a hot, wet plaster against her shoulder and side. He was a dead weight, his body slumping forward, his unconsciousness a terrifying void. She rode west. The word was a compass. Still, the mountains. He had pointed her toward them, a dark, jagged promise against the stars. She had no map, no sense of direction, only that one word. The night was endless, a cold, empty ocean of darkness. She rode until the horse began to stumble. its breath ragged. She knew from watching Kiowa that she could not kill the animal. It was their only way. She stopped in a cluster of boulders, a place that offered a meager break from the wind. She slid from the horse's back, her legs buckling. She was exhausted, her body screaming from the climb, the fall, the terror, but she could not rest. She pulled Kiowa from the saddle. It was a terrible, clumsy process. He fell from the horse, a heavy, unprotesting sack, and she dragged him, hissing with effort, into the shelter of the rocks. He was breathing, that was all, a shallow, rattling breath. She had to see the wound. With trembling, frozen fingers, she pulled his torn, bloody shirt aside. The wind was bitter, and he moaned, a low, animal sound, as the cold air hit the raw flesh. She had the pistol Kiowa had given her, and she used the soldier's flint and steel to strike a tiny, shielded spark. In the brief, flickering light, she saw the damage. It was bad. The bullet had entered his side, high on his ribs. It looked as though it had gone clean through, exiting his back in a larger, uglier hole. He was bleeding, a slow, steady seep that would drain the life from him. She looked at the man who had been a creature of pure strength. He was now as helpless as a child. He was her responsibility. She had no medicine. She had no cloth. She had nothing. She looked down at her dress, the gray mission dress, the symbol of her old life, her old prison. She took Kiowa's knife from its sheath at his belt. The steel was cold in her hand. Without hesitation, she knelt, gathered the hem of her heavy wool skirt, and began to cut. She sawed at the material, her hands clumsy, until she had a long, wide strip. She tore it into smaller pieces. She did what she had seen him do for the horses. She found snow, clean snow, and packed it against the wounds, both front and back. He groaned, his body arching in agony, even in his unconsciousness. "I am sorry," she whispered, her tears freezing. "I am sorry. Stay with me. Chediga." She pressed the snow, hard, until the cold began to slow the bleeding. Then she took the pieces of her dress and bound them, tight, around his chest. It was a clumsy, desperate bandage. It was all she had. She pulled his buffalo robe from the horse. She wrapped him in it, pulling his body into a tight curve. She sat behind him, pulling him back against her, just as he had done for her in the blizzard. She was the furnace now. She wrapped her own arms around him, pressing her small warmth against his back, and she began to pray. It was not the prayers of Sister Agnes. She did not pray for his soul, or for forgiveness. She prayed to the wind, to the stones, to the vast, cold darkness. She prayed to his gods. "Do not take him," she whispered into the wind. "He is all that is left. Do not take him." She held him through the night, his breathing a faint, terrible rasp. When the sun rose, he was still breathing, but his skin was on fire. The fever had come. She got him back on the horse. She did not know how. It was a blur of leverage and tears and whispered pleas. She tied him to the saddle with the rope from the fort wall, so he would not fall. She walked beside the horse, her hand on his leg, guiding them west, always west. She was no longer Emma. She was a different creature. She was a single, fierce point of will. She did not feel the cold. She did not feel the hunger, a sharp, twisting pain in her belly. She did not feel the exhaustion that made her legs tremble. She was a mother, a warrior, a protector. She was what he had taught her to be. For 2 days, she walked. She found a spring, and she forced water between his cracked lips, a few drops at a time from her cupped hand. He did not wake. He moaned, and he spoke, his voice thick with fever. He spoke in Navajo, but once he cried out, a sharp, broken sound, "Ayuanoshni," and then a name, not hers. It was a woman's name, one she did not know, his wife. The sound of it was a knife in her own heart. She was saving him, and he was dying, dreaming of another woman. She did not care. She pushed the jealousy down, a selfish, foolish feeling. She just wanted him to live. "She is not here," she whispered, her voice harsh, wiping his hot face with a piece of her wet dress. I am here. You will not leave me. I will not let you." On the third day, she found it. A place. It was a high canyon, like the one his people had hidden in, but smaller, more secret. A stream of clear water, not yet frozen, ran through it, and a shallow cave, dry and deep, was carved into the rock face. It was a home. She half carried, half dragged him from the horse into the cave. She set the horse to graze on the dry winter grasses by the stream. She gathered wood. She built a fire, not a hidden hunter's fire, but a large, blazing, life-giving fire at the mouth of the cave. The army was far behind. The cold was the enemy now. She laid him out on the buffalo robe. His breathing was worse. The bandage was soaked, and the wound had an ugly, dark look. It was poisoned. She knew what she had to do. Sani had taught her, though not with kindness. She had watched the old woman treat a warrior who had been gored by a deer. Sani had burned the wound. Emma took Kiowa's knife and held it in the heart of the fire. She waited until the steel was a dull, glowing red. Her hands were shaking. Her stomach was heaving. This was a violation. This was a sin, to mark a body. She looked at his face. He was fading. His breath was a mere whisper. "Forgive me," she said. She knelt beside him. She tore the old bandage away. She took the glowing knife from the fire. She pressed it to the wound. He did not scream. He arched off the ground. A single, convulsive, silent movement. The smell of his own burning flesh filled the cave. Emma cried out, her own voice the scream he had not uttered. She held the blade there for a long, terrible 3 count, then she pulled it away. She did the same to the wound on his back. He collapsed, utterly limp. His breathing stopped. "No," she whispered, her world ending. "No, no, Kiowa, do not." She put her hands on his chest, on the solid, still muscle, and she pushed, hard. "Breathe," she commanded. She hit him, her fist thudding against his breastbone. "Breathe." He took a single, ragged, whistling gasp, and then another. His body was broken, burned, but he was alive. He was still fighting. She collapsed beside him, her strength completely, finally gone. She lay on the cold stone floor, listening to the 2 sounds that were her entire world, the crackle of the fire and the faint, rasping sound of his breath. She fell into a sleep so deep it was almost death itself. She woke to the sound of his voice. "2." She shot up. The fire was low embers. The cave was gray with dawn. He was looking at her. His eyes were open. They were clear. The fever was gone. They were his eyes, the ones she knew, full of shadows and a deep, quiet intelligence. "Water," he had said. "Kiowa." She scrambled to the stream, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She filled her cupped hands and brought them to him, spilling half. He lifted his head, just barely, and drank, his lips grazing her palm. It was a caress, a communion. He drank and sank back, his eyes closing. But he was not unconscious. He was sleeping, a true, healing sleep. For 4 more days, she was his hands, his feet, his will. She hunted. She took the soldier's pistol, the one he had given her, and she sat patiently, as she had seen him do, until a rabbit came near. She shot it. The sound was a desecration in the quiet canyon, but the meat was life. She made a thin broth and fed it to him, spoonful by spoonful, which she carved from a piece of wood. She washed him. She took the last of her torn skirt and gently cleaned his skin, the soot, the blood, the sweat of his fever. She cleaned the burned wound, which was now scabbed and clean, no longer poisoned. She cut his hair, which was matted with blood, her fingers gentle. He watched her. He rarely spoke. He just watched. He watched her mend his clothes with the sinew she had found in his pouch. He watched her set snares by the stream, just as he had shown her. He watched her, in the evenings, sit by the fire, the pistol in her lap, her gaze on the mouth of the cave, guarding him. He saw the woman in the tattered, ruined mission dress, but he did not see the Bilagana captive. He saw a dying woman. He saw her strength, her resilience, her fierce, stubborn loyalty. He saw the woman who had dragged him from his own death. He saw the woman who had burned his flesh to save his life. On the seventh day, he sat up. His body was weak, his side a universe of fire, but his mind was clear. She was by the stream, washing their bowls. She turned, sensing him, and saw him sitting, his back against the cave wall. The buffalo robe pooled at his waist. She ran to him. "You should not be up. You are weak." She tried to push him, gently back down. He caught her wrist. His grip was not strong, but it was firm. It stopped her. He held her hand, turning it over, looking at her palm. It was no longer the soft, pale hand of the mission. It was scratched, burned, calloused. It was the hand of a survivor. It was the hand that had saved him. "You stayed," he said, his voice a rough whisper. "I told you," she said, her voice thick. "I will not leave you." He looked at her, his dark eyes tracing her face, the smudges of soot on her cheeks, the exhaustion under her eyes, the new, hard line of her jaw. "They are gone," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. He had seen the massacre. He was just now letting himself remember it. Tall Salt, Hastian, Sani, all gone. "Yes," she whispered. The grief for the people who had hated her was a strange, sharp pain. "I am the last," he said. He was a man with no clan, no people. He was an orphan, just like her. "No," she said. She knelt in front of him, her hands still in his. "You are not. I am here." This was her decision. It was a vow. She was not a white woman. She was not a Navajo woman. She was his, he was hers. They were a new tribe, a tribe of two, born in a blizzard and forged in a fire. "I will not go back to their world," she said, her voice fierce. "I will not leave you. This is my home. You are my people." Kiowa looked at her, and the last of his grief, the old, cold ache for his lost wife, the new, hot wound for his lost people, receded. It did not disappear. It would always be a part of him, but it was no longer his whole world. She was his world now. He had saved her from the soldier. He had saved her from the blizzard. And she, in turn, had saved him from the fort and from his own death. But more than that, she had saved him from his past. She had given him a future. He raised her calloused hand to his lips and pressed a kiss into her palm. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of allegiance. It was an acceptance. "Emma," he said, her name a prayer on his tongue. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They were in a quiet space, a hidden cave, the world far away. There were no more walls. There were no more guards, no more rules, no more Sister Agnes, no more soldiers. There was only the sound of the stream, and the fire, and their breathing. "My people, we have a saying," he whispered, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. "You cannot know beauty until you have walked in it. I have been walking in a storm, and I did not see." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a raw, new emotion, something more powerful than gratitude, more profound than desire. It was love. A love as harsh and real and strong as the land itself. "I see now," he said. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a clean path through the soot on her cheek. The long, cold winter of her old life was over. She was home, a new life, a terrifying, beautiful, and unknown life was just beginning. The cave became their world. Winter clung to the high desert, but its grip was weakening. The sun had a new, thin warmth, and the snow, which had been a shroud, became a source of life, melting into the stream, turning the canyon floor into a patchwork of brown earth and white ice. Kiowa healed, but it was a slow, agonizing process. The wound, which Emma's fire knife had cleaned, was a deep, puckered scar that pulled at his side with every breath. For the first week, he was a creature of weakness, a thing he had never been. He hated it. He hated the helplessness, the way she had to feed him, the way she had to help him sit up, the way she guarded him. And yet, he watched. His respect for her, born in the blizzard, grew into a profound, silent awe. She was tireless. She was a different woman from the pale, frightened girl he had pulled from the creek. That Emma was gone, as dead as Sunny, as dead as his old life. This woman was forged from the same hard, unyielding landscape as he was. She hunted. She took the soldier's pistol, a thing of loud, clumsy violence, and made it her own. She would leave him in the mornings, her face set, and he would lie in the cave, listening, his body tense, every instinct screaming at his own weakness. He would hear the single, flat crack of the pistol, and his heart would stop, fearing it was soldiers, and she would return. An hour later, 2 rabbits or a grouse hanging from her belt, her expression a mixture of pride and grim satisfaction. She became a dying woman, not in blood, but in spirit. She learned to read the sky. She learned to set the snares he taught her to make from sinew. She learned which barks to boil for a tea that eased his fever, which roots to dig and roast to supplement their meat. She did not pray to her old god. Her faith was in the fire she built, the pistol she cleaned, and the steady, returning beat of his heart. He, in turn, became her teacher. As his strength returned, he would sit, his back against the cave wall, and they would talk. He taught her the stories of the Dine, the stories of the first man and first woman, of how the mountains were made, of the sacredness of the corn. He taught her the ways of his people, a people that now existed only in him, and, he realized, in her. She listened, her mind a thirsty sponge. This was the structure, the meaning, the sense of belonging she had craved her entire life at the mission. That world had been a set of cold, hard rules. This was a world of living, breathing stories that connected her to the earth, to the sky, to him. She, in turn, told him of her life, a small, gray, empty story of an orphan in a room, scrubbing floors, waiting for a life that never began. "You were," he whispered one evening, his hand finding hers in the firelight, "a prisoner, long before I took you." "Yes," she said, her voice quiet. She looked at their joined hands. His was scarred, brown, and strong. Hers was now calloused, scratched, and capable. "You did not steal my life. Kiowa, you gave it to me." The long nights were cold. The fire was their heart. They shared the buffalo robe, but it was no longer a desperate act of survival. It was a choice. He was still weak, his wound aching, but his body was healing, and it was the body of a man. She was a woman. They were alone, the last 2 people on Earth. One night, the cold was sharper. He woke from a dream of the massacre, his body drenched in sweat, his breath catching in a silent sob. He saw Hastian fall. He saw Tall Salt, his hand outstretched. He saw Sani's charge. Emma was awake instantly. She had learned to sleep as he did, lightly, one ear open to the world. She saw the torment on his face. She did not speak. She simply moved, her small, warm body pressing against his side. She put her arms around his chest, her hand flat over his heart, as if to hold it in, to keep it from breaking. He turned to her, his need a raw, physical thing. He was not just a warrior. He was a man, broken, grieving, and profoundly, terribly lonely. He looked at her face in the firelight, her eyes full of a strength that matched his, a compassion that held no pity. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Emma," he breathed. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of hunger, of a man drowning and finding his only air. It was a kiss of grief and loss, and a fierce, burning, terrible need to be alive. She did not pull away. She met his kiss, her own need as deep as his. She was not a pale, Christian virgin. She was a woman who had seen death, who had held it in her hands. And she was choosing life. She was choosing him. He pulled the tattered mission dress from her shoulders, the last symbol of her old world. He unbound her hair, his fingers tangling in the long, soft strands. She was white. He was dying. It did not matter. Their skin, in the firelight, was the same color. They were just a man and a woman. He laid her back on the buffalo robe, his body covering hers, shielding her, worshiping her. He was not the warrior. He was not the captive. They were equals. They were partners. They were, in that moment, the only two people in the entire, vast, empty world. And in that cave, in the heart of the winter, they forged a new people, a new clan, a new beginning. Spring came, the snow melted, and the canyon stream became a raging brown torrent. The first green shoots appeared on the willows, and with the new life, Kiowa's strength returned. He was whole again. His wound was a silver scar, but his muscles were hard, his movements fluid. He began to hunt with his bow, his silent, deadly grace restored. But he was a changed man. The old, cold grief for his family was gone. It had been replaced by this new, living, breathing love for the woman who was his wife in all but name. But with his strength came the restlessness. "They are out there," he said one morning, looking east. "The soldiers?" Emma asked, her hand instantly going to the pistol at her belt. "No, not them," he shook his head. "The people. My people. I told you I was the last. It was the grief. It was a lie. I was not alone in that fight. The women, the children, they went into the crevice. Little Eagle, Long Mustache. I sent them south. They are out there. I must know." Emma felt a cold dread. This cave was safe. This was their home. Out there was the world that had tried to kill them. But she saw the look on his face. He was a protector. It was who he was. He could not rest, knowing his people, their people, now were wounded and wandering and alone. "When do we leave?" she asked. He looked at her, his love for her a physical, painful thing in his chest. You would come. It is dangerous. The soldiers." "You are my people," she said, her voice flat, repeating her vow. "Where you go, I go. I am not the weak woman you found by the creek. I can ride. I can shoot. I am your partner, Kiowa, not your burden." He touched her face. "I know," he said. "I know." They left the next day. They packed the horse with their few belongings, the buffalo robe, his bow, her pistol, a small supply of dried meat. They left the cave, their first home, and rode out into the world. It was a new world. It was green and wet and full of life, but it was also empty. They rode for days, Kiowa tracking, his eyes reading the earth. He was looking for signs, not of soldiers, but of his own. They found the trail of the 3 warriors he had sent south. It was cold, weeks old. They followed it. The trail was erratic. It told a story of men who were not just traveling, but hunting, scouting. They found them on the 5th day. They were in a high wooded valley, and they were not alone. They had found the band of women and children. It was a small, wretched camp, perhaps 20 people in all. The women and children who had escaped the crevice, and the 3 warriors, Little Eagle, Long Mustache, and the 3rd, a man named Red Shoe. They were starving. They had almost no weapons, only 1 rifle and a few bows. They were the remnant, the last of the people. Kiowa and Emma rode into the camp. The survivors looked up, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow with despair. When they saw Kiowa, it was as if they had seen a ghost. A woman cried out. "Kiowa," Little Eagle said, his voice a cracked whisper, "You are alive. The Creator has returned you." Then they saw Emma. She was riding behind him, her pistol visible, her face weathered, her gray dress in tatters. The faces of the women hardened, the hatred, the suspicion. It was all there, just as it had been. "The Bilagana," one of the women hissed, "the wife of Hastian. He brings the ghost, the curse." "She is not the curse," Kiowa said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the silent, stunned camp. He dismounted, his body still stiff, and he helped Emma down. He kept his hand on her, his arm around her waist. A public, defiant act of ownership and protection. "She is Astsa," he said, "woman. She is Dayai. She is here, she is Dine, my wife." The camp exploded in murmurs. His wife, this white ghost. "She is the one who saved me," Kiowa said, his voice silencing them. "When the soldiers shot me at the fort, she pulled me from the wall. She carried me. She led the horse. She brought me to the mountains. When my wound was poisoned, she burned it with fire. When I starved, she hunted for me." He looked at the surviving women, his gaze hard. "You see me alive. It is because of her. She is not Bilagana. She is my heart. She is one of the people." Emma stood beside him, her head high. She was terrified. These people had every reason to hate her. She was the color of the men who had destroyed their lives. But she did not flinch. She met their gaze. She saw their hunger, their loss, their grief. It was her grief, too. She unslung the rabbit she had shot that morning. She walked past Kiowa and laid it at the feet of Hastian's widow. She unhooked her water skin and offered it to the woman. The woman stared at the offering. She looked at Emma's calloused hands. She looked at her eyes. She did not see a white woman. She saw a hunter. She saw a provider. She saw a woman who understood. Slowly, the widow reached out and took the water skin. She looked at Kiowa and then back at Emma. "Your wife," the woman said, the word strange on her tongue. "My wife," Kiowa confirmed. The woman nodded. A single, sharp gesture of acceptance. "We are hungry," she said. "The hunter is welcome. The hunter's wife is welcome. There is much work." It was not a warm embrace. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement. It was a beginning. The war was not over. The soldiers were still out there. Their world was in ruins. But they were not a tribe of two. They were a tribe of 22. And they would face the new world, the hard, difficult, and unknown future, together. The valley they found was a high green secret, cupped in the hands of the mountains. The air was thin and sharp, but the stream that ran through it was wide and clear, and the grass was thick. Here, the junipers were ancient, and the pines grew tall. It was a place the people had known, in the old stories, a place of refuge. Kiowa had led them here, following a map not on paper, but in his memory. A map made of stories Tall Salt had told him by the fire. They were 22 souls, 4 men, 8 women, and 10 children. A broken, battered remnant. They had no homes, no food stores, and only 3 rifles, 1 pistol, and a handful of bows. They had only their lives, their hands, and the clothes on their backs. And they had a leader. Kiowa had not asked for the role. It had been thrust upon him. Tall Salt was gone. Hastian was gone. He was the only warrior of standing left. He was the man who had brought them to this place, and he was the man they looked to for what came next. The old, cold grief for his lost family, the solitary anger that had defined him, had to be put away. He was a husband now. He was a headman. He was the future of his people. And Emma was his wife. She was Dineazza, the Navajo woman, not by birth, but by deed. The acceptance Hastings' widow had shown her was the first crack in the wall of their hatred. It was not friendship. It was a truce. But it was a start. The other women watched her, their eyes sharp, critical. They watched this pale woman, with her tattered gray dress and her strange, blunt-spoken ways. Emma did not try to win them over with words. She won them with work. While the men, led by Kiowa, hunted and fortified the canyon, the women began the long, hard task of rebuilding a life from nothing, and Emma worked alongside them. She did not know how to weave. She did not know how to grind the corn they did not have. But she knew how to hunt. She would take her pistol and walk out from the camp, her movements now quiet, her eyes sharp. She would return with rabbits, with squirrels, with grouse. The women, who were struggling to find edible roots, would look at the meat she brought, and their hard expressions would soften. She was a provider. In their world, there was no higher calling. She gathered firewood, her small body wiry and strong. She scraped hides, her hands stained, her stomach no longer turning at the smell. She sat with the women, and she began to learn. Hastings' widow, whose name was Zaniba, finally sat beside her. She took a spindle, a simple stick, and a puff of wild cotton, and she began to show Emma how to spin. Her hands were rough, her movements impatient, but she was teaching. "Your hands are strong," Zaniba said, her first words to Emma that were not of anger. "But they are clumsy, like a man's." "Teach me to make them like yours," Emma said, her fingers fumbling with the fiber. And so she learned. She sat in the circle of women, a white-skinned woman in a borrowed Navajo skirt, and she learned to spin, to dye the wool with roots and berries, and, finally, to weave. Her first blanket was a disaster, a lumpy, uneven thing. The women laughed, but it was not the cruel laughter of the old camp. It was a shared, rough humor. Emma laughed with them. Kiowa watched this, and his love for her, which had been a fierce, protective, and private thing, settled into a deep, quiet pride. She was his partner in all things when he sat with the other men at night, planning their new life. Emma sat with him. Little Eagle, who was young and still thought like a warrior, spoke. "We must raid. The Bilagana, the settlers to the south. They have horses. They have sheep." "No," Kiowa said. His voice was final. "We are warriors," Little Eagle protested. "We must fight." "We are," Kiowa said, his gaze on the fire. "But we are also farmers. We are husbands. We are fathers. Tall Salt is dead. Hastin is dead. They died fighting. I will not lead the last of our people to their graves. We will not raid. We will not fight. We will live." He looked at Emma. She was listening, her chin on her knees. "The war is over. Little Eagle, we have lost. The Bilagana have taken the world, but they have not taken this world. They have not taken this canyon. We will build our hogans. We will plant our corn. We will raise our children. We will be ghosts. We will let the white world forget us. That is our new fight, the fight to survive." Emma spoke, her voice quiet, but clear. "He is right. They will not come here. They think we are all dead. They think I am dead. The colonel, he will report that the hostiles were eliminated. He will report that I was killed, a victim of the savages. It is a better story for him than the truth." The men looked at her. She spoke with the knowledge of the enemy. She was their weapon, their shield, their bridge. "We need seed," she said. "We cannot steal it, but maybe we can trade for it." "Trade," Long Mustache scoffed. "With who, the Bilagana?" "No," Emma said. "With the other tribes, the Hopi, the Zuni. They are farmers. They live to the south. They do not love the Bilagana, but they do not love the Dine either. We were raiders. She looked at Kiowa. But you are not a raider, not anymore. It was a dangerous, brilliant plan. They had nothing to trade except their skill. Kiowa and Little Eagle rode south. They took the horses captured from the fort, and they took the silver coins Kiowa had taken from the dead sergeant's pockets. They returned 3 weeks later. They had no horses, but they had 2 mules, loaded with seed corn, with beans, and with 4 young sheep. They had traded with a Zuni village. It had been tense, but Kiowa had spoken not as a warrior, but as a headman, a man desperate to feed his people. They had seen his honesty, and they had seen his white wife's pistol, which he carried as a symbol of their strange new world. They planted. The women, with Emma among them, used sharp sticks to poke holes in the rich canyon floor, dropping the precious seeds. They built hogans, the men cutting the timber, the women packing the earth. They built a new, small community. Life was hard. It was a hardship Emma had never even been able to imagine at the mission. Her back ached, her hands bled. She was hungry, always hungry. But it was a good life. It was a real life. Every small victory was their own. The first green shoots of corn, the first lamb, born in the spring, the first blanket she finished that was not a joke, but a warm, strong, beautiful thing. She was one of them. She was dying. When she looked at her reflection in the stream, she no longer saw the pale orphan. She saw a woman with sun-darkened skin, with strong, capable hands, and with eyes that were clear and unafraid. She was Kiowa's wife, and she was carrying his child. She told him one evening, as the sun was setting, painting the high canyon walls in shades of rose and gold. They were standing on the rim of their valley, looking down at the small, peaceful cluster of hogans, at the smoke rising, at the children playing by the stream. Our corn is growing," she said, her hand on her belly, "and so is our son." Kiowa turned to her. He had seen the change in her body, the new, soft roundness. He had been waiting, his heart full of a hope he was afraid to name. He did not speak. He reached out and placed his large, scarred hand over hers, on her stomach. He felt the faint, tiny movement of the new life within her. His son. His and hers. A child not of the Bilagana world, or the Dine world, but a child of their world. A child of the new people. He looked at her, his eyes, which had held so much grief, now full of a light she had never seen. He had lost a son. He was being given a new one. "A son," he whispered, the word a prayer. "He will be a hunter, like his mother." Emma laughed, a real, clear laugh that echoed in the quiet air. "He will be a leader, like his father." They stood, wrapped in the vast, quiet beauty of their new home. The world beyond this canyon was still turning. The war was still being fought. The Bilagana were building their iron roads, their square, ugly towns. The old ways were dying. But here, in this high, secret place, a new way was being born. It was a life of hardship, of challenges, but it was a life of hope. It was a life of love. Kiowa put his arm around her, pulling her close. He looked out at the future, a future that was no longer a dark, empty void, but a living, growing thing. He had found his peace, not in revenge, but in forgiveness, not in fighting, but in building. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. She was no longer a captive. She was no longer a prisoner. She was free. She had found her home. She had found her people. She had found her love. And in a world that was being torn apart, they had found a small, quiet piece of peace, and they had claimed it together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so grateful to have you here. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from in the world. I would love to connect with you and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to the channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people. Your support means everything.